Ancient Israel to the Fall of the Second Temple. John Rogerson. Historical and Methodological Perspectives. Introduction. The major source for information about the religion of ancient Israel is the Hebrew Bible, referring to 24 books written in Hebrew from roughly the 9th to the 2nd century BCE and accepted as Septuagint, a translation of the Hebrew Bible and other texts, begun in the 3rd century BCE, such as the books of Maccabees. An important contribution is also the major source for information about the religion of ancient Israel is the Hebrew Bible, referring to 24 books written in Hebrew from roughly the 9th to the 2nd century BCE and accepted as Holy Scripture by Jews. Additional information comes from books not found in the Hebrew Bible, but included in the Greek Septuagint, a translation of the Hebrew Bible and other texts, begun in the 3rd century BCE, such as the books of Maccabees. An important contribution is also made by the findings of archaeology, including the Dead Sea Scrolls. That scholars possess an extensive literature by way of original sources for ancient Israel's religion is, at first sight, an advantage. On further inspection it turns out to be a disadvantage, for the following reason. For much of recent Western history the Bible has been regarded as an infallible source of information for the origin of the universe and the earliest history of the human race, not to mention the religion of ancient Israel. In parts of the world where biblical criticism has not touched new and younger churches, the Bible is still regarded in this way. If the Bible is believed to be infallible, the task of describing ancient Israel's religion becomes simple. For the period covered by the Bible, all that is needed is for its contents to be outlined with modern readers in mind. Unfortunately for this simple task, scholars working in universities and church academies have, over the past 200 years, studied the Bible like any other book. The result has been that a radically different picture of ancient Israel's religion has been proposed compared with that presented in the Bible. Not surprisingly, this has not been welcomed in circles where the Bible has been, and is still, regarded as infallible, and critical scholars are often accused of being unbelievers whose aim is to Map 5.1. Ancient Israel. Undermine what God has revealed. This is not a charge that can be discussed here. To put the matter in perspective, however, the picture of ancient Israel's religion as presented in the Bible will be outlined, followed by the reasons why critical scholarship has proposed alternative reconstructions. The present state of the matter in biblical studies will then be indicated. The biblical picture. The Bible begins with the creation of the universe and of the human race. Although Genesis 1 uses the common Hebrew word Elohim meaning God or gods for the Creator rather than the name Yhwh, which is the specific name of the God of Israel, it is implicit in Genesis 1 that it is the God of Israel who is the Creator, and in Genesis 2 the name Yhwh is added to that of Elohim producing, in the standard English translations, the compound name Lord. God. The opening chapters of Genesis describe various acts of human disobedience in regard to God, and of inhuman behavior towards other humans. A universal flood, the biblical traditions have much in common with other flood stories from ancient Mesopotamia, see Rogerson and Davies 1989, destroys all but the family of Noah and the animals preserved by him in the ark, but the attempt at a new beginning for the human race after the flood fails. The story of Israel's religion begins when, after the destruction of the Tower of Babel and the dispersal of the human race into separate countries with their differing languages, God calls Abram 1 to leave Haran in northern Mesopotamia and to migrate to a country where God will multiply Abram's offspring and make them a blessing for the other peoples of the world. The remainder of Genesis describes the fortunes of Abraham's family. His grandson Jacob is renamed Israel and his 12 sons become the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. The highly artistic story of Joseph, Jacob's 11th son, moves the Israelites from the land of Canaan promised to the Hebrews' founding ancestors to Egypt, where they multiply greatly in numbers, are forced into slavery and are delivered under the leadership of Moses. The first half of the Book of Exodus, and the Book of Numbers, containing as they do the story of the Exodus from Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, the institution of the Passover festival to commemorate God passing over the Israelites when Egypt was afflicted by the plague and the wanderings in the wilderness are among the most important parts of the Bible, both for their role in the development of biblical ethics and for the part that they play in present-day Judaism. For 40 years Moses leads the Israelites from Egypt back to the Promised Land, stopping on the way at Mount Sinai, where God reveals the laws that will govern Israel's civil and religious life. Aaron is consecrated as priest, and he and his descendants are entrusted with the performance of the rituals and sacrifices that will remove ritual defilement and enable Israel to be a holy people before God. These founding laws and institutions are contained in the books of Exodus through to Deuteronomy. Already in the book of Numbers it is related how the Israelites began to occupy that part of the Promised Land east of the River Jordan. The book of Joshua describes the occupation of the land west of the Jordan under the leadership of Moses' successor Joshua. This is described as a united campaign of the tribes, who, following Joshua's death, occupy the areas allocated to them by Joshua. No leader comparable to Moses or Joshua arises in the following period. Occasional leaders, called judges, are inspired by God to deliver the people from subservience to various neighboring nations. According to the Book of Judges, it is God who is responsible for allowing the Israelites to become subservient, as a way of punishing them for turning to other gods. The last of the nations to become Israel's overlord is the Philistines, and the Philistine threat has consequences which are as significant for the religion of Israel as is the Exodus, the Passover and the law-giving at Sinai. Out of the Philistine threat develops the institution of Israelite kingship, whose greatest representative, David, secures Jerusalem as his people's capital, and whose son, Solomon, builds the first temple. Following Solomon's death, the kingdom splits into a larger, northern kingdom of Israel, the present-day Bethel and Samaria hills, the Jezreel Valley and Lower and Upper Galilee, with various capitals including, ultimately, Samaria, and a smaller, southern kingdom of Judah, with its capital Jerusalem ruled by the descendants of David. The books of Kings, which record the history of the two kingdoms, devote more space to Israel than to Judah, and interpret obedience to God in terms of loyalty to God's chosen sanctuary in Jerusalem. On this view, the entire northern kingdom, Israel, exists in defiance of God's will and all its kings are evil. Yet Israel is also the location of prophetic groups fiercely loyal to God, who become actively engaged in resistance to their kings. Noteworthy in this regard are Elijah and Elisha, accounts of whose exploits extend from 1 Kings 17 to 2 Kings 10. Kings of Judah have a better chance of being faithful to the Jerusalem sanctuary, yet even some of them are condemned for allowing worship to be carried on at so-called high places, what the biblical writers see as places of pagan offerings outside Jerusalem. The books of Kings show the two kingdoms struggling to survive against stronger neighbors, Syria, Assyria and Babylon to the north and east and Egypt to the south. The northern kingdom, Israel, eventually falls to the Assyrians, 7221 BCE, the southern kingdom, Judah, to the Babylonians, 587 BCE. In both cases, Israelites are deported. In the case of Judah the first temple is destroyed. These disasters are interpreted as the fulfillment of prophecies given in the name of God by prophets from the 8th century onwards, whose words are recorded in books of the Bible bearing their names. Well known are Hosea, Amos, Micah and Isaiah, chs. 1-11, who lived in the second part of the 8th century, and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, who lived in the 7th to 6th centuries. The only glimpse of conditions during the period when Jewish leaders were deported into exile in Babylon is given by Ezekiel, and it is such a small glimpse as to amount to nothing. The silence is broken only by the Book of Ezra, which records that Cyrus, the Persian ruler, who defeated the Babylonian Empire in 540, issued a decree encouraging the Jews to return to their own land and to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and the prophecies of Haggai and Zechariah, chs. 1-8, cover what we know on modern chronology to be the period 540 to roughly 420 BCE. They record the building of the Second Temple, completed c. 515, and the missions of Ezra and Nehemiah, 458 to 420. The latter find Jerusalem in a dire state physically and religiously, and institute reforms designed to recall the people to the observance of the law given at Sinai. With these books, the biblical account of Israel's religion ends, and the story is taken on by books such as 1 and 2 Maccabees. They tell of the attempt by the Seleucid king Antiochus IV to proscribe Judaism, in 1687, and of the resistance offered by the Hasmoneans, the family of Mattathias of Modine, led initially by Judas Maccabeus. Material provided by the Jewish historian Josephus, 37-100 CE, supplements the books of Maccabees, and takes the story through the Roman occupation, from 67 BCE, to the final destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 CE. Readers will have noticed that the brief outline just given is a continuous story with little actual information about Israel's religion. This has been deliberate, because the Bible is to a large extent a long story which relates how Israel was chosen by God, and how it suffered changing fortunes throughout its history depending on whether or not it was faithful to the laws revealed by God. Certain central themes emerge from the story, of course, Israel as the people chosen by God, and delivered by him from slavery in Egypt, Jerusalem as the sanctuary chosen by God at which his people should offer sacrifice and worship, Moses as the lawgiver and Aaron as the ancestor of the priestly families, David as the chosen king whose descendants will rule in Jerusalem and from whose line will come a future deliverer. The Bible also indicates that the Israelites often turned to other gods, such as the god of the storm, Baal, and that Israelite rulers did not uphold justice in the land. From the Psalms, and books such as Job and Ecclesiastes, insights can be gained into the personal piety of devout Israelites, including their attempts to understand why the wicked often prospered and the faithful suffered. Books such as the Wisdom of Solomon and Ecclesiasticus, the Wisdom of Jesus ben Sira, show Judaism adopting Greek ideas and concepts. What is found in books such as the Psalms, Job, Ecclesiastes, Wisdom of Solomon and Ecclesiasticus has not been radically affected by critical scholarship. What has been affected is the overall story of Israel's religion as related above, and with it have come new and radical ideas about the origins and development of Israel's faith, ideas which continue to change in the light of new research and archaeological discoveries. The course of these critical challenges must now be charted. The critical reassessment. The Bible has always been studied critically, if critically is understood to include judgments based upon human scientific knowledge and the need to make sense of the Bible as a whole. The statement in the Hebrew text of 1 Samuel 13:1, that Saul was 1 year old when he began to reign, was not taken literally by ancient interpreters, contradicting as it did both knowledge about human growth and development and other parts of the Bible that indicated that Saul had a son, Jonathan, who was probably in his late teens when Saul became king. The literal impossibility of 1 Samuel 13:1, and many other contractions, was well known to Jews and Christian interpreters of the Bible from at least the 2nd century CE, see Rogerson 1998, Chapter 1. However, methods were found of harmonizing them, in the belief that an infallible book could not contradict itself. The critical reassessment that led to a new reconstruction of Israel's religion came about because scholars stopped harmonizing contradictions, and used them as a means of probing behind the picture of Israel's religion as presented in the Bible. The fundamental contradiction that opened the door to the critical reassessment was that between the command in the Book of Deuteronomy that Israelites should worship God at only one sanctuary and should destroy all other. Table 5.1 Chart of conjectural composition of books of the Bible, including Apocrypha. People and events. Books. Second period 650 to 540 BCE. Slavery in Egyptian. Exodus. Israelites in Canaan. 1250. Early monarchy. 10th to 9th century. Temple and court administration records. Ahab king of Israel. 873 to 53. Compiled in Jerusalem and Samaria. Prophetic revolution of Yhwh. 841. 8th century. David king in Jerusalem. Collections of materials that will become. Assyrian destruction of Samaria. 722. Hebrew Bible Oracles of Hosea, Amos, Micah. Second period 650 to 540 BCE. 7th century. Josiah's reforms, Jerusalem center of worship. 622. First drafts of Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Nahum, Zephaniah. Babylonians invade Jerusalem. 597. 6th century. Destruction of Jerusalem Temple. 587. Jeremiah works collected, Ezekiel, Isaiah 40 to 55. Jewish leaders exiled in Babylon. Habakkuk, Haggai, Zechariah 1 to 8, 9 to 50, 56 to 66. Cyrus, king of Persia defeats. 540. Work on Israelite history, Deuteronomy, more. Babylonians and releases the Jews. Psalms, Lamentations. Jerusalem Temple rebuilt. 515. 5th century. Third period 540 to 50 BCE. Pentateuch, Genesis, Deuteronomy, Joshua. Alexander defeats Persians. 333. 2nd Kings, Proverbs all nearing final form, Ezra. Judah part of Greek Empire. Nehemiah, Jonah, Ruth, composed. Seleucid rule of Israel. 200. 4th century. Antiochus IV persecutes Jews. 168. Chronicles, Malachi, Zechariah, Song of Maccabean revolt. 153. Songs, Job, Ecclesiastes, Esther composed. Masada Synagogue. Roman rule in Judah. 63. 3rd century. Herod the Great becomes king. 37. Isaiah 24 to 9, Enoch 1 to 36, 72 to 92. Parthians temporarily occupy Jerusalem. 34 to 32. Ecclesiasticus, Rest of Enoch, Wisdom of Solomon. Romans occupy Jerusalem. 67 CE. 1st century. Destruction of Second Jerusalem Temple. 70 CE. 3 and 4 Maccabees, Tobit, Judith, Baruch, Prayer of Manasseh, 2 Esdras, Dead Sea Scrolls. Sanctuaries, Jude 12:2, 14, and the information in 1 Samuel that leaders such as Samuel offered sacrifices at various sanctuaries or places, including Mizpah, 1 Sam 7:9, a city in the land of Zuph, 1 Sam 9:5, 11 to 13, and Gilgal, 1 Sam 11:14, 15. In the story of David, David goes to the sanctuary at Nob where he and his men are given holy bread to eat, 1 Sam 21:1, 6. The problem created by this contradiction is that, according to Deuteronomy, the law of the single sanctuary was given by Moses, in which case either Samuel or David was unaware of the law, or deliberately broke it. In the Book of Amos the Israelites are criticized because they offer sacrifices at Bethel and Gilgal but oppress the poor, Amos 4:1 to 5. The accusation that their sacrifices are insincere is a powerful one, but Amos could have brought a more powerful argument, that Moses had explicitly forbidden any sacrifices except at the single sanctuary, which was Jerusalem in Amos' time. The reason why Amos did not use this argument is that he was not familiar with a law of a central sanctuary, not out of ignorance, but because no such law existed in his day, the second half of the 8th century BCE. The central point of the critical reassessment came to be the date of the Book of Deuteronomy, and the following position received widespread critical acceptance by the end of the 19th century. Deuteronomy, with its demand that sacrifice should be offered to God only at one sanctuary, was written in the 7th century BCE and was the basis for the reformation of Josiah, king of Judah, in 622, 2 Kings 22:3 to 23:25, in which all sanctuaries other than the Jerusalem temple were destroyed. The stories in 1 Samuel, which indicate that there were many legitimate Israelite sanctuaries, reflect a period prior to Josiah's reformation. Further, the fact that Samuel offered sacrifices at various sanctuaries even though he did not belong to the priestly tribe of Levi or the house of Aaron, he belonged to the tribe of Ephraim, 1 Sam 1:1, indicates that it was not always the case that only the descendants of Aaron could offer sacrifices to God. Bound up with the critical reassessment was the theory that underlying the books of Genesis to 2 Kings were 4 documents, or, according to other scholars, streams of tradition, that were called J, because of the use of the divine name Yhwh or Jhwh in German, the J in German being pronounced as Y-E, because of the use of the divine name Elohim, God, and P, because of the presence of material relating to priesthood and ritual, and D. According to this theory, J and E were written in the 9th to 8th centuries, D was largely the Book of Deuteronomy, and P was written after the exile. A 3-stage theory of the development of Israelite religion was widely accepted, in the following terms. First period, 1900 to 650 BCE. Proto-Israelite families or clans migrated from northern Mesopotamia to Syria-Palestine. Their religion was a clan religion in which God was not tied to a particular location but traveled with the clan and could be worshipped at whatever sanctuary the clan came to. The clans were polytheists but had a special relationship to a particular manifestation of the deity. They used the common Semitic designation El, God, for God. There was no established priesthood, and leaders of clans offered sacrifices. Sacrifices were offered at times of crisis, e.g. before battles, to express gratitude and devotion, and were believed to establish communion with God and fellowship within the clan or family. The events of the Egyptian slavery, exodus and journey to the Promised Land gave rise to the belief that the God of the Hebrews is named Yhwh, thought to have been pronounced Yahweh. It is unlikely that Moses instituted the laws and the priestly and sacrificial institutions attributed to him in Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers. He probably did promulgate some form of the 10 Commandments which were kept and carried in the Ark of the Covenant. The occupation of Canaan brought the Israelites into contact with a settled, agricultural people, the Canaanites, whose fertility religion based upon the storm god Baal proved to be attractive to ordinary Israelites. Pure Yaoism was upheld by ecstatic prophetic groups led by men such as Samuel, Elijah and Elisha who involved themselves actively in political matters. Later, this role was taken on by the so-called writing prophets, Hosea, Amos, Micah and Isaiah, mainly Chs. 1-11, in the 8th century. These prophets were the creators of the ethical monotheism of ancient Israel. They condemned the worship of other gods and they demanded, in the name of Yhwh, that kings and those in power should uphold and support the poor and needy. They threatened, if these things were not done, that Yhwh would punish his people by delivering them into the power of their enemies. Second period, 650 to 540 BCE. An attempt to consolidate the teachings of the prophets into a practical program of legislation led to the production of a first draft of Deuteronomy, probably during the reign of Manasseh, 6987-642. The writers were court officials influenced by prophetic teaching. Because sanctuaries outside Jerusalem had led ordinary Israelites to worship the pagan deities associated with them, the destruction of these sanctuaries was enjoined, and a single sanctuary promoted. This had practical consequences. Provision had to be made for the support of the Yhwh priests who served at the condemned sanctuaries, and the Passover had to be redesignated as a national festival held at the single sanctuary. Previously, it had been a local festival centered upon the homes of families, Deut 16:1-7, 2 Kings 23:21-23. The laws of the Book of the Covenant, Exod 21:1-23:19, dating from the first period had to be reformulated to take account of the centralization of the sanctuary. The work began, and continued during the exile, of revising the story of Israel in the light of centralization. This particularly affected the books of Kings, whose rulers were judged to be good or evil according to whether they had suppressed worship at sanctuaries other than Jerusalem. The main prophets of this period, Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Deutero-Isaiah, in Isaiah 40-55, proclaimed a full-blooded monotheism, by maintaining that other gods did not exist, and that in events such as Cyrus' defeat of the Babylonian Empire, God was using even a non-Israelite ruler to work out his, God's, plans for Israel and the nations, Isaiah 44:28, 45:1-7. Third period, 540-50 BCE. The great shock of the destruction of the Jerusalem Temple in 587 and the experience of exile led to a profound shift in Israelite religion away from the freedom and plurality of the first period to a much greater rigidity. The urgent need to avoid a repetition of the destruction of the Temple, a destruction, according to the prophets, brought about by God as a punishment for disobedience, led to the attempt to impose upon all Israelites the holiness laws appropriate to the priests. Rituals and sacrifices designed to remove defilement from among the people were prescribed, and the Israelite community increasingly became a theocracy, that is, a religious community ruled by priests and governed by divine law. The Bible began to assume the form familiar to present-day readers, with its claim that the priestly and sacrificial ordinances had been given by God via Moses after the Exodus. According to the Critical Reassessment, these were post-exile innovations. When the Jews became part of the empire of the Greek rulers of Syria, the Seleucids, in 200-198 BCE, and Antiochus IV attempted to outlaw Judaism, he was opposed not only by the family of Mattathias, but by Hasidians, mighty warriors of Israel, all who offered themselves willingly for the law. 1 Mac 2:42. These were the representatives of those in Judah whose devotion to the Jewish law indicated the progress of Jewish religion towards the Pharisaism of the last century before the Common Era, and the successors of the Pharisees after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE, the founders of Rabbinic Judaism. However, the Hasidians and their successors were not the only strand of late Judaism. The Sadducees represented the aristocratic and priestly families of Jerusalem, and denied belief in resurrection. On the other hand, thanks to contacts with the Zoroastrianism of the Persian Empire, Jewish religion developed dualistic and apocalyptic ideas, which were expressed in books such as Enoch and Daniel. These saw the world as a battleground between the human forces of good, Israel helped by God, and the forces of evil, the other nations, as well as between supernatural angelic forces led respectively by the archangel Michael, Dan 12:1, and Satan, under that and various other names. There is also the development of belief in life after death, cp. Dan 12:2-3. Assessment of the Critical Reassessment. What has been attempted in the above paragraphs is a summary of the critical position often associated with the name of the German scholar Julius Wellhausen, see its statement in Smith 1881, that commanded widespread support by the end of the 19th century. Many features of this position remain intact today. In other regards it needs to be revised. For example, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls from 1947 to 1967 has entirely altered our knowledge of the last 2 centuries before the Common Era, while some of the archaeological discoveries and new theories of recent times pose challenges to the critical reassessment that are almost as radical as the challenge posed by the critical reassessment to the traditional biblical picture. The justification for outlining the essentially 19th century critical reassessment is that it has become the basis for all subsequent critical work on the religion of ancient Israel, and in a rapidly changing academic discipline it remains, in spite of its defects, a logical and coherent theory around which discussion can be organized. 20th century refinements. 2 refinements of the critical reassessment proposed in the first half of the 20th century owed their existence to social anthropology. The first, classically expressed by Easterly and Robinson, 1930, assumed that Israelite religion passed through the stages of animism and polytheism before reaching monotheism, and it searched the Bible for evidence of survivals of animism, belief in spirits associated with high places, wells, trees, etc., and polytheism. The latter is not hard to find. For example, in the Psalms, the Lord is a great God, and a great King above all gods, Psalm 95:3. For the former, reference can be made to the oaks, sacred trees, at Mamre, General 14:13, or the sacred stone upon which Jacob dreamed a dream about heaven, General 28:11, 18. This is a method that would be regarded as highly questionable today, see Rogerson 1978, 34-6, but makes the assumption that all religions have developed in similar ways, and that Israelite religion was no exception. The second refinement, drawing upon anthropological theory of the 1920s, assumed that there had been a uniform culture pattern that covered the ancient Near East from Mesopotamia to Egypt, including ancient Israel. Representatives of this theory included S. H. Hooke and Sigmund Mauinkle, see Rogerson 1978. If this was so, then it would be necessary to look for features of the religion of this pattern in the Bible. Because, it was believed, texts deriving from Babylonia best described this religion, attempts were made to reconstruct from the Bible an elaborate ritual of New Year celebrations or of royal coronations in ancient Israel, based upon these rituals in Babylon. According to this reconstruction, the Israelite king was believed to be quasi-divine. At the New Year and or his coronation he played a leading part in reenacting a sacred drama, in which he engaged the forces of chaos. An initial defeat, in which he was subjected to ritual humiliation and death, was followed by resurrection and a sacred marriage. His victory ensured stability and agricultural prosperity for the coming year reign, and part of the ceremony may have included the reading of an early draft of the creation account of Genesis 1. The so-called royal psalms were especially appealed to in this connection, and the first line of Psalms 93, 97 and 99, usually translated the L. ORD reigns or the Lord is king, was rendered the Lord has become king. The meaning was that God's kingship had once more been established following the New Year coronation ceremony. Like the first refinement, the second would probably find few supporters among present-day scholars. In a revised form, however, it commands widespread acceptance. The revised form assumes that, in the official religion of Jerusalem, there was an annual or periodic ceremony in which God's covenant with the house of David was celebrated and renewed, Krauss 1966. The ceremony included a reenactment of David's bringing of the Ark of the Covenant from Kiriath Jearim to Jerusalem, 2 Sam 6:1, 19. The Ark of the Covenant was a portable shrine containing the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments. As the Ark was solemnly placed in the temple, trumpets were blown and it was proclaimed that the God of Israel was King of all nations, compared to PS 47:5, 9. A priest or cultic prophet then rehearsed the conditions of the covenant between God and the house of David. One of the sons of your body I will set on your throne. If your sons keep my covenant and my testimonies which I shall teach them, their sons forever shall sit upon your throne. PS 132:11, 12. The importance of the refinements is that they appealed to general theories of religion as described in social anthropology and sought to apply them to the religion of ancient Israel. Whether or not they were successful, they highlighted the fact that it is impossible to describe a religion without making certain assumptions. The traditional position outlined above, pp 216-18, assumed that God had communicated his will directly to Moses. The critical reassessment worked with an essentially unilinear model, in which 2 phases followed an initial phase. Easterly and Robinson were representatives of those using an evolutionistic model of religions, while advocates of the role of divine kingship in ancient Israel had adapted a diffusionist model. The present chapter, similarly, cannot avoid making certain assumptions, but before these are outlined it is necessary to consider briefly a recent, and radical, proposal about the history of ancient Israelite religion, by Near, 1990. Near's subtitle expresses clearly his aim, Alttestamentliche Jhwh Glaub im Kontext syrisch-kanaanäischer Religion des 1. Jahrtausends wie Chr. Old Testament belief in Yhwh in the context of Syrian Canaanite religion of the 1st millennium BCE. Near argues that in the religion of Syria-Palestine 2 phenomena occur. First, the high god El, known for example from the Ugaritic texts, disappears, while second, the storm god Baal-Shaman increasingly assumes the functions of the high god. Near's case is that precisely the same phenomenon occurs in the Hebrew Bible, and that Yhwh increasingly assumes the functions of a high god in the course of the first millennium BCE. As boldly stated, this does not sound radical, but it has radical implications for understanding how biblical texts should be handled when reconstructing ancient Israel's religion. Two examples can be given. Psalm 91 begins, "He who dwells in the shadow of the Most High, who abides in the shadow of the Almighty, will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust." In these two verses four divine names occur: Most High, Hebrew Elyon, Almighty, Hebrew Shaddai, Lord, Hebrew Yhwh, and God, Hebrew Elohim. It is normally assumed that Elyon and Shaddai are survivals from a polytheistic past and that they have been assimilated in Israel's monotheistic religion to become epithets for Yhwh. Indeed, it has become almost a commonplace that Elyon was the name under which God was worshipped in Jerusalem before the city was captured by David. The basis for this view has been the reference in Genesis 14:18-19 to Melchizedek, king of Salem, taken to be Jerusalem, who was priest of God Most High, Hebrew El Elyon. According to this interpretation, Melchizedek was the priest-king of Jebusite, i.e. pre-Israelite, Jerusalem, whose god was Elyon or El Elyon. Nia turns this theory on its head by arguing that Elyon occurs only in post-exilic texts in the Bible, 6 times alone in Daniel and 4 times in Daniel following God, and in the pseudepigrapha and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Elyon is therefore not a survival from Israel's earliest contact with Canaanite culture but a title used in post-exilic texts in order to describe Yhwh as the Most High, i.e. the highest God. Further, the fact that Elyon occurs in texts that contain themes drawn from Canaanite mythology too indicates that the writers of the Hebrew Bible drew upon Canaanite mythology in order to claim that Yhwh was the highest God. This argument destroys at a stroke the two refinements mentioned at the beginning of this section. For the attempt to describe Israelite religion in evolutionary terms, it was necessary to regard the use of divine names such as Elyon as remnants of polytheism. Nia argues that the use of these divine names is a literary device in post-exilic literature to express the absolute supremacy of the one God. The divine kingship theory likewise used mythological themes, especially in the Psalms, as evidence that there had been sacred dramas centered around the king in pre-exilic Jerusalem. According to Nia, such themes were part of the language deliberately used by writers to express the absolute supremacy of Yhwh in the post-exilic period, when there was no longer a king. The second example from Nia concerns his view that in the late post-exilic period biblical writers often deliberately used non-monotheistic language because monotheism was so well established that polytheism and mythology offered no real challenge to it. He writes of a literary paganism, instances of which can be found in texts such as Proverbs 9:1, 3a, 5 and Song of Songs 8:6 ff. Nia has deliberately adopted a comparative history of religion's approach, and assumed that developments that can be observed in the religion of Syria-Canaan of the first millennium BCE provide a model for understanding the development of ancient Israelite religion. Whether or not his view is accepted, and it is carefully and impressively argued, what is demonstrated is that the reconstruction of Israelite religion is more complex than even the critical reassessment had recognized. This complexity is increased by recent literary and archaeological research in Hebrew Bible studies, which is promising to redraw the map of the discipline. The critical reassessment assumed two things: first, that for the period from the settlement of the Israelites in Canaan onwards, i.e. from circa 1250 BCE, the books of Judges to 2 Kings contained a basically reliable account of Israel's history, a history which could be critically reconstructed with the help of extra-biblical sources. Secondly, the critical reassessment assumed that some of the sources used in Judges to 2 Kings could be dated to the 9th to 8th centuries BCE. Both of these assumptions have been challenged in recent scholarship. Recent archaeological findings suggest that the northern kingdom, Israel, and neighboring kingdoms such as Moab, Ammon and Edom did not exist significantly until the 9th century BCE, and that Judah did not become a state until the 8th century. It is beginning to be questioned whether the Solomonic gates and walls found at Megiddo, Hazor and Gezer did in fact date from Solomon's time. A minimalist view of Jerusalem's history, Auld and Steiner 1996, argues that the city had not been occupied for some centuries prior to David's capture of it. All this puts a large question mark against the Hebrew Bible's view of a small Davidic and Solomonic empire in the 10th century BCE incorporating the neighboring kingdoms of Damascus, Ammon, Moab and Edom. The publication in 1993 and 1995 of the so-called House of David inscription found at Dam produced fierce argument between scholars who accepted a critical version of the biblical picture and those who did not. The former argued that the inscription showed that David had indeed established a dynasty that had controlled territory as far north as Dan. The opponents argued that the inscription did not refer to the house, dynasty, of King David. The truth may lie between the two extremes. While claims that David could have controlled large areas of territory embracing Damascus, Ammon, Moab and Edom are unlikely to be true, the possibility remains that he was capable of defeating the rulers of key cities, and of thereby making a claim on their kingdoms, even though this did not amount to controlling their territory. The idea that rulers exercised total sovereignty over areas enclosed by borders is a modern one, Giddens 1985, 52-3. Nonetheless, even the mediating position proposed here entails that the biblical material must be read with a good deal of caution. The second revolution in recent biblical studies is the tendency to date in the post-exilic period books or sources that were once dated in the pre-exilic period. A case in point is the so-called Yahwist, an author or tradition among whose stylistic trademarks is the use of the name Yhwh. In the mid-20th century he was confidently identified as a sort of historian who, working in the 10th to 9th centuries, was responsible for producing an account of Israel's fortunes from the time of Abraham to that of David or Solomon. Today, the Yahwist's work is increasingly dated to the post-exilic period, i.e. 6th to 5th centuries BCE. This, if correct, has profound consequences for the critical reassessment, for this reconstruction depended crucially upon the contrast between the many sanctuaries mentioned, for example in 1 Samuel, and the command of the single sanctuary in Deuteronomy. On the assumption that 1 Samuel could be dated to the 10th-9th centuries and Deuteronomy to the 7th century, it was possible to use these sources, as dated, as evidence for two distinct phases in Israelite religion. If, however, 1 Samuel was composed after the exile, Deuteronomy has also been dated to the post-exilic period, it is no longer possible to juxtapose the information contained in these books so as to produce two distinct phases. The assumptions of the present chapter. Two main assumptions will be made in the thematic treatment of ancient Israel's religion below. The first is that, when allowances have been made for recent archaeological and literary research, a reasonably coherent general picture of Israel's history can be reconstructed as the basis of biblical and other material, at least from the 9th century onwards. The names of a number of kings of Israel and Judah are attested in extra-biblical sources, including Omri, Ahab, Jehu, Pekah, Hosea, Hezekiah and Jehoiakim, see Rogerson 1999b. Events are also attested in extra-biblical sources, such as the invasion of Palestine by the Egyptian Sheshonkai in c. 925 BCE, 1 Kings 14:25-27, the destruction of Samaria in 7221 by the Assyrians, and the capture of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 597 and the destruction of the temple a decade later. Josiah's reform in 622 BCE also seems to be confirmed by the iconographic evidence gathered by Kiel and Yhwh, 1992, that shows that Judahite high officials of that period banished all forms of pictorial representation from their seals. Also, there can be no doubt that Judah passed from Babylonian to Persian hegemony, 540 BCE, that Alexander's defeat of the Persians, 333 BCE, brought Judah into the sphere of Greek influence. And that Judah was first part of the Greek Empire of the rulers of Egypt, 323-201-98, then of Syria, from 201-98, and finally a part of the Roman Empire, from 63 BCE. That these epochs had an effect on Israelite religion cannot be doubted, an account will be taken of them where appropriate. The second main assumption will be that the most appropriate model for describing Israel's religion in all its phases is that proposed by Geertz, 1964. This classic study of the religion of Java charts the interactions between the religions of various groups in a small town in east-central Java under three headings: Abangan, Santrai and Prijaji. Abangan is roughly folk religion, including belief in spirits, sorcery and magic. Santrai is the observance of Islam, also with political activities, and subject to internal reformist movements designed to produce a purer Islam. Prijaji is found among the former members of the aristocracy and bureaucracy. It derives from court etiquette and is an amalgam of artistic practice and Hindu-Buddhist mysticism. Geertz sums up the three types of religious practice as follows. Abangan, representing a stress on the animistic aspects of the overall Javanese syncretism and broadly related to the peasant element in the population. Santrai, representing a stress on the Islamic elements of the syncretism and generally related to the trading element, and to certain elements in the peasantry as well, and Prijaji, stressing the Hinduist aspects and related to the bureaucratic element. These, then, are the three main subtractions I shall describe. Geertz 1964, 6. Geertz's model has the advantage, for use with ancient Israel, of avoiding the unilinear model of the critical reassessment, and it also enables religion to be seen as a phenomenon related to labor and class divisions. Geertz also shows how religion has both a uniting and a disrupting role to play in a society. It needs to be pointed out, of course, that Geertz's scheme has not escaped reassessment as a description of the religion of Java, see most recently, but on the whole positively, BT 1999. Ultimately, no one scheme can adequately describe the complicated facets of a religion deeply embedded in a society or its subcultures. Taking Geertz's model to ancient Israel, I would distinguish three levels of belief and practice: popular Yaoism, prophetic Yawism and official Yaoism. Popular Yaoism, probably practiced by the peasantry, was a syncretistic religion which included divination, necromancy and fertility beliefs. Never to the fore in the Bible, for the obvious reason that it is only mentioned in order to be condemned, it is nonetheless a significant factor, and one attested to by archaeological discoveries such as statuettes and seals, although the latter were hardly the property of the peasantry. Passages such as Deuteronomy 18:10-12 and Isaiah 8:19 indicate what must have gone on in popular Yaoism. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, a soothsayer, or an augur, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For whoever does these things is as an abomination to the Lord. Jude 18:10-12. When they say to you consult the mediums and the wizards who chirp and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Isaiah 8:19. Prophetic Yawism was probably a peripheral factor socially in ancient Israel, but one which was highly significant in shaping Yawism as it is presented in the Bible. From the evidence of 1 Samuel and the books of Kings, whether they are dated early or late, prophetic groups lived on the margins of society and may even have tried to adopt alternative lifestyles. One group, not unconnected with prophetic groups, was the Rechabites, who refused to build houses, plant vineyards or drink wine. Jer 35:1-11, compared to 2 Kings 10:15-23. At the time of Josiah's Reformation, 622 BCE, prophetic groups seem to have become allied to some members of the Judahite aristocracy and bureaucracy. At any rate, the latter was strongly supportive of prophets and their ideals. An unanswerable question is whether prophets such as Amos, Hosea, Micah and Isaiah worked as individuals or whether they were the leaders of schools of disciples. Peterson 1981. Much recent work on prophetic books implies that there were prophetic schools. Towards the end of the Second Temple period, prophecy seems to have been assimilated into official Yaoism. However, the group that lived at Qumran, and produced at least some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, could be described in terms of prophetic Yaoism. They lived on the margins of society in the Judean desert, they were sharply critical of official Judaism to the point of rejecting it altogether, and they adopted an alternative lifestyle with the intention of embodying the ideal Israel. Official Yaoism took several forms, and included an openness to artistic, musical and literary products of an international nature. The comparison with Geertz's Prijaji is interesting here, for whatever is made of the claim that Solomon composed 3,000 proverbs and 1005 songs, 1 Kings 4:32, or that the men of King Hezekiah copied the proverbs of Solomon, prove 25:1, it constitutes evidence for an aesthetic and intellectual component in official Yaoism that was open to international influence. The statements in Ecclesiastes 2 that the author, who claims to have been a king, even if this is a fiction, had made parks, gardens and forests, all watered by pools, and had constructed fine houses and had employed singers, also points to an aesthetic element in the outlook of the aristocracy. Official Yaoism no doubt took two distinct forms during the so-called divided monarchy. In Jerusalem, Yaoism centered upon God's covenant with the house of David, and if there was a historical David, the likelihood is that his was a soldier's religion, with Yhwh as a warrior who assisted him in his battles. The official Yaoism of the northern kingdom, Israel, was more pragmatic, and also susceptible to powerful opposition mounted by the prophetic groups that operated in the north. Under Omri and Ahab, it was convenient, for the purposes of international trade and alliances, to promote the worship of the Canaanite storm god Baal along with that of Yhwh. The so-called prophetic revolution of Yhwh in c. 841, when an army commander, Yhwh, was impelled by prophetic groups to overthrow the dynasty of Omri and Ahab and to destroy the prophets of Baal, was an attempt to make official Yaoism conform to prophetic Yaoism, 2 Kings 9:1-10:30. The dynasty of Yhwh, if not its ideals, endured for nearly a century, and when the northern kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrians in 7221 BCE, the northern prophetic groups probably migrated to Judah, where their presence and activity brought about a fundamental change in the Jerusalem form of official Yaoism. The distinctive beliefs of the northern prophetic groups, centered upon the traditions of the Exodus, combined with the ideology of God's covenant with David to produce the official Yaoism under whose aegis the Bible reached the form in which it appears today. Beliefs and practices. Yhwh and the gods. Yhwh, his consorts and other gods in popular, prophetic and official religion. The origin of the name Yhwh is unknown. According to biblical tradition, Exod 3:13, 15, 6:2, 3, the name was revealed by God to Moses prior to the deliverance of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. In Exodus 3:14 the name is connected with the verb to be in Hebrew in a passage variously translated as I am who I am or I am what I am or I will be what I will be. The fact that the name cannot be associated with any object in the natural world had often been noted. At Exodus 33:19 and 34:6 there are other expositions of the meaning or significance of the name. And he, God, said I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name the Lord, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. Exod 33:19. The Lord passed before him, Moses, and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children, to the third and the fourth generation. Exod 34:6-7. Scholarship of the Critical Reassessment period looked for the origin of Yhwh among the Kenites, on the basis of Exodus 3:1-6 and 18:1-12. In these passages there is mention of Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, described as a priest of Midian. It is while looking after Jethro's flock that the name Yhwh is revealed to Moses, and on Moses' arrival in the Sinai desert following the Exodus, he is greeted by Jethro, who offers sacrifices to God. The mention of the Kenites as being descended from Moses' father-in-law, here called Hobab, in Judges 4:11 gave rise to the theory that the Kenites were a Yhwh worshipping clan among the Midianites from whom Moses learned the name, Rowley 1950, 149-54. Modern critical scholars will find it difficult to accept this kind of argumentation, which treats Exodus 3 and 18 as historical sources for the 13th century BCE. Interest has been aroused, however, by the occurrence of the phrase Yhwh in Shar-Suland in texts from the time of the Egyptian Amenephis III, 1391 to 1353 BCE, and Yhwh has been tentatively identified with a sacred mountain or mountain god in the region of Seir or ancient Edom, North 1988, 46. There are also biblical traditions that speak of Yhwh coming from Seir, as in the Song of Deborah. Lord, i.e. Yhwh, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled. Judge 5:4, compare 2 PS 68:7-8. The biblical references at least testify to the belief, among some Israelites, that Yhwh came from the region of Edom, although the origin of the name is less important than what was believed about Yhwh. The earliest non-biblical reference to Yhwh in connection with the Northern Kingdom, Israel, comes in the Mesha inscription, found in Transjordan and dated to the first half of the 9th century BCE. It reads, lines 17 to 18, I took from there, Nebo, the vassals of Yhwh, Pritchard 1955, 320. It indicates that the Northern Kingdom, ruled by Omri, c. 885 to 874 BCE, who is named in the inscription at lines 4 to 5, had outposts in Transjordan with holy places where Yhwh was worshipped. Much interest has been aroused by the discovery, in 1975-6, of 2 inscribed jars at Kuntilat, a kind of caravanserai 50 kilometers south of Kadesh Barnea in the Negev. Dated about 800 BCE, they were evidently written and painted on by travelers, Renz and Rolig, 1995, 48-50, and among the inscriptions are references to Yhwh of Samaria, Yhwh of Teman and Yhwh and his Asherah. These references introduce us to popular conceptions of Yhwh. For the travelers who stopped at Kuntilat, Yhwh seems to have been a local deity worshipped in Samaria and Teman, in the south of Edom, and possibly believed to accompany travelers on their journeys. The reference to Yhwh and his Asherah has provoked much discussion, centering on whether Asherah was a goddess, a female consort of Yhwh, or a sacred pole or tree that represented Asherah. At present, the balance of evidence favors the latter view because in ancient Hebrew, on all the evidence available, it is not possible to add a suffix meaning his to a proper name such as Asherah. The worship of the fertility pole or tree is strongly condemned in the Bible, 1 Kings 15:13, which is a good indication of its probably widespread practice. In the Elephantine Papyri, written from a Jewish colony near Aswan, downstream from the first cataract of the Nile, towards the end of the 5th century BCE, the god Yhwh, Yhwh, is mentioned along with 2 male deities and the female deity Anathbethel, Pritchard 1955, 491. Whether the latter was a consort to Yhwh or whether the other deities named were worshipped by non-Jews cannot be determined. When using the Bible as evidence for worship of other gods in ancient Israel, it is not always easy to distinguish between popular and official Yaoism at some periods. Indeed, there may have been occasions such as during the reign of Manasseh, 698 to 642 BCE, when there was little distinction. Also, if local sanctuaries wanted to cater for local needs as well as supporting official Yaoism, they may well have been pluralistic in what they offered. However, the distinction between popular and official Yaoism is an important one to maintain. We are on safest ground for popular religion with Jeremiah 44:15-19 and Ezekiel 8:14, according to which there were women who worshipped the Queen of Heaven, possibly some form of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, or a sun goddess, and Tammuz, a fertility god. Amos 5:26 accuses the house of Israel of worshipping Sarkut and Kaiwan, gods which have been connected with the cult of Saturn. Another god referred to in Jeremiah 32:35 and elsewhere is Molech, evidently a Canaanite god of the underworld to whom people offered human sacrifice in the valley of Hinnom near Jerusalem, day 1989. And of course there is abundant evidence of the worship of the storm god Baal at popular and official level. That Yhwh was also worshipped at a popular level is indicated by extra-biblical texts such as the Lokish Ostraka, messages written by Jewish soldiers on pieces of broken pot and sent to Lachish during Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of Judah in 588 BCE, Pritchard 1955, 322, although nothing can be said about the form that such worship took. Prophetic Yawism was characterized by what has been called Yhwh alone devotion, Lang 1983, and was nationalistic in the sense that Israel, Judah, was believed to stand in a special relationship to Yhwh and was therefore expected to display unalloyed loyalty to him. Yet prophetic Yawism also sees the Yhwh-Israel relationship in a universal context. Yhwh does not exist merely for Israel's benefit, and Yhwh will deliver Israel into the hand of its enemies and will let the temple be destroyed, if necessary, in order to punish and restore the people. This view leads necessarily to the idea that Yhwh controls the destinies of other nations as they impinge upon Israel, or Judah. Isaiah 10:5-11 summons Assyria to the berod of Yhwh's anger against his people. Jeremiah 27:6 describes the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar as Yhwh's servant, whom all the nations will serve. Isaiah 44:11 and 45:1, dated to the mid-6th century BCE, describes the Persian conqueror Cyrus as Yhwh's shepherd and anointed, the Hebrew word for Messiah. The claim that Yhwh has universal power over the nations is also found in what is probably not the direct descendant of prophecy, but what is treated here for the sake of convenience under the heading of prophetic Yawism, namely, apocalyptic. In the Book of Daniel there are stories in which Nebuchadnezzar, Dan 4:1-37, and Darius, the 6th century king of Persia, Dan 6:25-28, acknowledge that the God of Israel is the Most High God. This literature also contains a significant difference from the prophetic viewpoint, in that the world has become a battleground between supernatural forces of good and evil whose struggles affect human nations. Nations are therefore no longer instruments used by Yhwh to discipline Israel. They represent malign forces ranged against Israel, which only God and his heavenly servants can protect. This view is strongly represented in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where the community, representing the true Israel, the sons of light, finds itself ranged against a whole panoply of supernatural and human evil from which only God can ultimately deliver it. Official Yawism, as already pointed out, took different forms in the northern and southern kingdoms, until the two forms were united after the fall of Samaria, 7221. Both forms could be syncretistic. Ahab, c. 873-853 BCE, king of Israel, is described in 1 Kings 16:31-32 as serving Baal, building an altar and temple for Baal, and making an Asherah. Indications of the extent of syncretism in the official Yawism of Jerusalem can be seen in the account of Josiah's reform, 2 Kings 23:1-14, and the abominations in the Jerusalem temple which Ezekiel saw in a vision, Ezek 8:1-18. On the other side, names or titles of other gods were taken into official Yawism and used as synonyms for, or instead of, Yhwh, in order to indicate his universal power. These included Elyon, Most High, Shaddai, Almighty, and the general Semitic terms El and Elohim. A specific name found in official, and prophetic, Yawism is Yhwh Severot, usually translated as Lord of Hosts, and associated with the Ark of the Covenant, Num 10:35-36, 1 Sam 4:3-4, which seems to have symbolized the warlike presence of Yhwh among his people. The hosts of the title were the earthly and heavenly armies of Israel, in accordance with the belief that the powers of heaven fought on Israel's side. Judge 5:20, from heaven fought the stars, from their courses they fought against Sisera, Israel's enemy in the battle. The title was a specifically Jerusalem title. The openness of official Yawism, the Yawism of the aristocracy and bureaucracy, to international influences is well illustrated by the figure of wisdom in the Book of Proverbs. In Proverbs 1:20-33 wisdom addresses her readers' hearers, urging them to seek her counsel. In Proverbs 8:22-36 she claims that Yhwh created her before anything else, and that she enjoyed an intimate relationship with him, which is one reason why her teachings should be taken seriously. The wisdom figure in Proverbs probably predates the passing of Judah under Hellenistic influence after 333 BCE and is derived from international wisdom teaching known from Egypt and Babylonia. After 333, however, the figure of wisdom was no doubt influenced by Hellenism, and she plays a major role in the Wisdom of Solomon, probably written in Alexandria 100 to 50 BCE, and the Wisdom of Jesus ben Sirach, Ecclesiasticus, written around 190 to 180 BCE. A notable feature of official Yaoism as the Second Temple period comes to a close is the absence of the name Yhwh in extant Hebrew texts. The non-biblical texts among the Dead Sea Scrolls use El, and in some biblical manuscripts written in the Square Aramaic script the name Yhwh is written in an adaptation of the Phoenician script. This no doubt reflects an avoidance of writing or pronouncing the name Yhwh out of respect. Yhwh's attributes. The process by which Yhwh became the highest god in prophetic and official Yaoism involved taking over functions that were associated with other gods in the neighboring religions. These included fertility, ball, and creation and the maintenance of justice, the sun god. Yhwh is also appealed to in the Psalms as god of healing. That the popular religion, and some kings, found it difficult to apply this lofty monotheism in practice is evident from the condemnations of pagan practices in the Bible. The passages cited above from Exodus 33:19 and 34:6, stress mercy, graciousness and steadfast love as primary attributes of Yhwh. Steadfast love, Hebrew hesed, is a word used almost exclusively in connection with Yhwh in the Old Testament. It contains the sense of loyalty, reliability and inexhaustibility. The New English Bible renders it as unfailing love, and it expresses Yhwh's determination to be true to the covenants made with Israel come what may. Three other key terms associated with Yhwh are glory, name and holy. Glory, Hebrew kavod, is a synonym for the divine presence in all its mysterious awesomeness. In Ezekiel the glory of Yhwh, meaning the divine presence in the temple, removes itself from the temple prior to the temple's destruction by the Babylonians in 587 BCE, Ezra 11:22. In the prophet's vision of a restored temple, the glory returns, Ezra 43:1-5. However, the prophet also sees a vision of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, Ezra 1:28, and a description of this is given in chapter 1 in terms of wheels, living creatures, fire and lightning. Name theology is found in the Book of Deuteronomy and in the books of Kings and is closely associated with the divine presence in the temple, as in the phrase the place, i.e. sanctuary, which the Lord your God will choose, to make his name dwell there, Deut 12:11. Holy is best taken to mean that which belongs to. What is holy is God's property, and it can only be approached with awe and reverence, and not without danger, compare to 2 Sam 6:6-7. Only properly consecrated priests of the priestly family, and only if they are without blemish as human beings, Lev 21:16-24, may present sacrifices to God. A derived sense of holy is ritually pure. If Israel is God's special property, then it, too, must be ritually pure, and one aim of the laws in Leviticus and Numbers is to extend to the whole people the regulations of ritual purity that originally only applied to priests. In Deuteronomy the emphasis is upon the purity of the land of Israel, and the belief that it can become defiled by evil moral action, such as an unavenged murder. Rituals for purifying the land in such a case are prescribed, Deut 21:1-9. When the Bible says that Yhwh is holy, compare to Isa 6:3, Lev 21:8, the claim ranges across a wide spectrum of meaning, from awesome otherness through moral rectitude to ritual separatedness. Angels, demons and the Satan. Yhwh is not a solitary figure in the Bible. Although he absorbed the functions of other deities, he presided over a heavenly court and employed angelic beings to carry out his will. Towards the end of the Second Temple period, the angelology and demonology become more developed. If it is possible to take stories from Genesis, Exodus, Joshua and Judges as expressions of popular Yaoism, in the sense that such stories would need to correspond to the expectations of readers hearers of these stories, the following points can be made. Yhwh was believed to operate on earth by means of angelic messengers in human form, about whose real nature there was sufficient obscurity to make it difficult to tell that they were not humans. Genesis 18 begins with the statement that Yhwh appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre. The narrative continues with an account of 3 men who visited Abraham, and whom Abraham took to be important travelers who needed this hospitality. As the story continues, one of the 3 men appears to take on the role of Yhwh, while the other 2, explicitly called angels in Genesis 19:1, in Hebrew the word means messenger, go on to Sodom. Here they are entertained by Lot, whose hospitality arouses the curiosity of the men of Sodom, who insist that the visitors should be brought out of the house in order that they might know, i.e. sexually abuse, them. In Genesis 32:22-32 Jacob, prior to his reunion with his brother Esau, wrestles with a mysterious figure who is first described as a man, v. 24, who then displays supernatural power, v. 25, and who finally tells Jacob that he has been wrestling with God. Elohim. In Joshua 5:13-15, prior to the Battle of Jericho, Joshua is met by a man who describes himself as commander of the army of Yhwh. Gideon is also confronted by a divine messenger in Judges 6:11-24. Although the text describes him as the angel of Yhwh, Gideon carries on a normal conversation with him, and only becomes aware of the status of his visitor when the latter produces fire from a staff. The parents-to-be of Samson have a similar visitation in Judges 13:2-23, which the woman describes in the following words: "A man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God, very terrible." Judge 13:6. In those stories the angels are not named. The Book of Tobit, on the other hand, written around 200 BCE, features an angel who is indistinguishable from a young man, and who is named Raphael. He plays a much fuller role in the story of Tobit than the angels in the incidents mentioned above, and presumably represents the stage in popular religion in which the angelology had become more developed. Prophetic Yawism was in particular the locus of the belief that Yhwh presided over a divine court. The form of prophetic oracle known as the messenger formula expressed this particularly powerfully. In secular diplomacy, a king would send a message to another king by speaking to his ambassador as though he were actually addressing the other king. The formula was stereotyped and included surveys of past dealings between the kings. Its climax would come with the words "therefore, thus says X the great king to Y." The ambassador would then go and repeat verbatim in the presence of the other king what he had heard his own master say. The prophets adopted the messenger formula for their own declarations to monarchs and people, and when their oracles reached the words "therefore, thus says Yhwh," they spoke as though they had been standing in the heavenly court, hearing a message from Yhwh which they were now bound to speak verbatim to whomever the message was intended for. Accounts of prophetic visions in the Bible draw on the idea of the prophetic presence in the divine court. Micaiah ben Imlah relates a conversation in the divine court dealing with how Ahab might be lured to his death, 1 Kings 22:19-23, while Isaiah heard the voice of God saying to his court, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Isaiah 6:8. The Book of Jeremiah claims that true prophets are the ones that have stood in Yhwh's council, for who among them, the false prophets, has stood in the counsel of the Lord, to perceive and hear his word. Jer 23:18. There are other passages that indicate a belief that Yhwh had apportioned the care of various nations to angelic members of the divine court, reserving Israel for his own special attention. The classic statement is in Deuteronomy 32:8-9. When the Most High, Elion, gave to the nations their inheritance. When he separated the sons of men. He fixed the bounds of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. In Psalm 82 it is likely that God condemns the angelic beings responsible for the fortunes of other nations, because they have not upheld justice and protected the weak. You are gods, sons of the Most High, Elion, all of you, nevertheless you shall die like men, PS 82:6, 7. The occurrence in both passages of Elian is noteworthy. It is difficult to know whether this material represents prophetic or official Yaoism, except that the emphasis on justice in Psalm 82 is characteristic of prophetic Yaoism. In what can be dated with some confidence as late books, a developed angelology and demonology is apparent. In Daniel, 2nd century BCE, there appear the named angels Gabriel, 8:16, and Michael, 10:21. Tobit, c. 200 BCE, adds Raphael, 5:4, and 2 Esdras 4:1, 100 CE, adds Uriel. Before the developed angelology and demonology are discussed, however, it is necessary to comment upon popular belief in malevolent powers. For ancient Israelites, as for other peoples of the ancient Near East, regions beyond the confines of ordered social life were the haunt of malevolent powers. Ruins were particularly to be feared, and it is no accident that oracles concerning ruined Babylon and desolated Edom in Isaiah 13:9, 22 and 34:8, 14 contain references to satyrs and to Lilith, Isaiah 34:14 where RSV has night hag. Satyrs were goat-like demons, Lilith was a female demon prone to attack women in childbirth and men who slept alone, Handy 1992, 324-5. A more sophisticated version of this kind of superstition is found in the Book of Tobit, 3:18, where there is a demon Asmodeus who killed the 7 husbands of Sarah before she could have intercourse with them. In Exodus 4:24-26 there is possibly a survival of the same belief. We are told that Yhwh met and tried to kill Moses but was prevented from so doing when his wife Zipporah cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses's feet, i.e. penis, with it. Whatever this strange and difficult passage may mean, it seems to retain a popular superstition about demonic powers attacking human beings. If the mysterious figure of Azazel in Leviticus 16:8-10 is a demon representing the forces of chaos and disorder to whom the scapegoat is made over, then this is another instance of popular superstition, albeit one which left its mark on official Yaoism. Although new and radical views about the relative dating of biblical books may ultimately affect what immediately follows, the following stages in the development of demonology in ancient Israel's religion have traditionally been delineated. 1. A classical period indebted to the ethical monotheism of the prophets in which Yhwh was held to be responsible for everything that happened, whether good or evil, compared to Amos 3:6, Isaiah 45:7. 2. A transition period in which a Satan figure, the Hebrew verb Satan, means to be an adversary, begins to emerge, gradually taking on increasingly sinister and independent features. In Job 1:6-7 the Satan is a member of Yhwh's heavenly court, and although he afflicts Job with great misfortune and personal suffering, this is only with Yhwh's permission. In Zechariah 3:1 Satan has taken on a definite accusing role, and he is rebuked by Yhwh. 3. The ethical dualism of the late Second Temple period, familiar also in the New Testament and especially the Dead Sea Scrolls, in which Satan, or Melchizedek, Belial, Beliar, Mastema, the chief of the evil angels has various names, see further Newsom 1992, 253, exercises power over the world with the help of evil angelic assistants. In the Dead Sea Scrolls the world is divided into the sons of light, members of the Qumran community, and the sons of darkness, the rest of the world, who are ruled respectively by the Prince of Light and the Angel of Darkness, IQS 320F in Verms 1997, 101. However, the Angel of Darkness has limited power over even the sons of light, who can obtain help from God and his Angel of Truth and who wait for the time when God will destroy all falsehood forever, IQS 4:18F. This kind of ethical dualism is also presupposed in the New Testament, where the angels Gabriel, Luke 1:19, 26, and Michael, Jude v. 9, Rev. 12:7, appear and where there is war between good angels led by Michael and bad angels led by Satan, Rev. 12:7, 9. The light-darkness dualism is particularly strong in John's Gospel, where there is also a reference to the defeat of the ruler of this world, John 12:31. It is possible to see the influence of Zoroastrianism here, Hinels 2000, 29-92. In a fragmentary text from Cave 11 at Qumran, 11q13 in Worms 1997, 500-2, the role of Michael as leader of God's angels and destroyer of the angels of darkness is taken over by Melchizedek. The text is a commentary on the Jubilee law of Leviticus 25, and Psalm 82 in which God judges the gods appointed over the nations. The leader of the evil angels is called Belial, and the text mentions the theme of the rebellion of the evil angels against God, a theme often linked to Genesis 6:1-4, the fall of the sons of God who desired and married the daughters of men. On a certain day after 9 or 10 Jubilees, Jubilee is a period of 50 years, Melchizedek will destroy Belial and his angels and bring comfort to those faithful to God. It is interesting that in the New Testament the figure of Melchizedek is used to enable the letter to the Hebrews to interpret the ministry of Jesus in terms of priesthood, referring back to PS 1:10:4. Israel and the nations. Election and covenant. That Israel, and Israel when represented by Judah, stands in a special relationship to Yhwh is presupposed throughout the Bible, and is the Israelite version of the general belief in the ancient Near East that nations stand under the patronage of their gods. Expressions of the view that Yhwh had appointed other divine beings to look after other nations at Deuteronomy 32:8 or Psalm 82 have already been noted. In popular and much official Yaoism, this no doubt amounted to the view that Yhwh should concentrate on ensuring the prosperity of the nation and its members and should not be too sensitive to corruption, injustice and occasional disloyalty. Prophetic Yawism took a less relaxed view, and proclaimed a Yhwh who not only would not tolerate corruption, injustice and disloyalty among his people, but who would allow them and their land to be destroyed by other nations as a punishment for their action. Even the reason for Yhwh favoring Israel was qualified, according to the prophetically inspired Deuteronomy 9:4-6. Do not say in your heart, "It is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to possess this land." The Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stubborn people. On the other hand, prophetic Yawism invoked the theme of a parent's love for a child, to stress that, come what may, Yhwh would never surrender his special relationship with Israel. Hosea 11:1-9, Isaiah 46:3-4, 49:15. Various covenants between God and other parties are recorded in the Bible, between God and Noah and his descendants and other living creatures, General 9:8-16, God and Abraham and his descendants, General 17:1-8, God and the Israelites who had escaped from Egypt, Exod 24:3-8, God and the house of David, 2 Sam 7:11-16. Of these, that between God and Israel as set out in the Book of Deuteronomy is the most significant, and it probably follows the general pattern of vassal treaties known from elsewhere in the ancient Near East of the first millennium BCE. Vassal treaties bound lesser nations to greater nations. They contained a historical prologue describing the background to the treaty, stipulated the obligations of the lesser party to the greater party, detailed grim consequences that would follow if the vassal proved to be disloyal, and called upon gods and powers of nature to be witnesses to the treaty. For an example, see the vassal treaties of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria 681-669 BCE in Pritchard 1969, 534-41. All of these elements, the last with the omission of other gods, can be found in Deuteronomy, historical prologue, for 44-1132, Israel's obligations to Yhwh, 12:1-26:19, descriptions of blessings and curses that will follow obedience or disobedience, 28:1-68, the summoning of heaven and earth as witnesses of the covenant, 30:15-20. The Ten Commandments, Exod 20:1-17, Deuteronomy 5:6-21, also contain elements of the pattern. They begin with a reminder that Yhwh delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, i.e. the historical prologue. They demand absolute loyalty to Yhwh, you shall have no other gods before me, and they set out obligations for Israel to observe. Whether parts of the Bible actually used treaty forms that were current in the ancient world at the time is disputed, but likely. It is incontestable that there are similarities between the way in which great rulers gave legal expression to the loyalty required from vassals, and the way in which parts of the Bible formulated Yhwh's claim upon Israel's loyalty. Israel's failure to observe the covenant is a feature of the books of Kings and of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and prepares the way for the mention of a new covenant, Jer 31:31-34, compared to Ezek 36:24-32. The idea of a new covenant was taken up by the Covenanters of the Dead Sea Scrolls, see Vams 1997, 67-72. In the Damascus document, a medieval text discovered in Cairo in 1896-7 but fragments of which have been discovered at Qumran, see Vams 1997, 125-56, the Covenanters were said to have entered into a new covenant in the land of Damascus, CD 6. 19, Vams 1997, 132. Whether Damascus is to be taken literally or not, the community members believed that they constituted the new Israel. An annual covenant renewal ceremony was held during the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, at which new members were admitted and existing members renewed their commitment. The task of community members was to study, interpret and obey the laws of God contained in the Jewish scriptures. Penalties, including expulsion, were prescribed for any member who broke the community's rules, and admission seems to have been a process that involved several years of trial membership. Other nations are servants of Yhwh. He has not dealt with any other nation, they do not know his ordinances. This claim in Psalm 147:20 could well create the impression that other nations occupied a very minor second place in Israel's worldview. This would be a mistake. The Bible has many surprising things to say about other nations, at any rate in the non-apocalyptic literature. The apocalyptic literature, for example parts of Daniel, sees foreign nations as hostile forces ranged against Israel, forces that will be punished and judged by God. A feature of the three major prophetic books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, is a section of oracles against foreign nations, Isaiah 13-19, Jer 46-49, Ezek 25-32. Amos has 2 chapters devoted to the same, Amos 1-2, while Nahum, in its final form, is an oracle against the Assyrian capital Nineveh. The oracles against the nations are largely expressed in terms of judgment, but they also claim that Yhwh is active in their affairs. For example, the oracles against Babylon in Jeremiah claim that Yhwh is bringing the kings of the Medes against Babylon, Jer 51:11, while in Jeremiah 46:13 Egypt is warned about what Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, is about to do in Egypt. The oracles claim that Yhwh is active in the disasters that are befalling nations, and that he is working out his judgment upon them. In this, of course, they are faring no better than Israel, which is also the object of oracles of judgment throughout the prophetic literature, and which is punished by God by means of nations such as Assyria, Isaiah 10:5, and Babylon, Jer 32:28. The attitude of Yhwh to members of other nations and their religion is sometimes surprisingly generous. A Moabite woman Ruth is the heroine of the Book of Ruth and is described as an ancestor of David, while the Book of Jonah, perhaps not without some irony, casts the citizens of the Assyrian capital of Nineveh in the unlikely role of people who repent immediately they hear Jonah's warning of impending disaster. In 2 Kings 5:17-18, the Syrian commander Naaman, who has been cured by Elisha of leprosy, utters a noble speech in which he begs Yhwh for pardon when, in performance of his official duties, he is required to accompany his master the king to the house of the god Rimmon. For his part, Naaman wishes to acknowledge no god other than Yhwh. In Amos 9:7, the prophet claims that Yhwh brought not only Israel out of Egypt, but also the Philistines from Kaphtor and the Syrians from Kir. Biblical claims about Yhwh's special relationship with Israel have to be read in the light of Yhwh's involvement with the other nations also. The religious consciousness of Israelites. Creation and cosmos. The best-known account of creation in the Bible is in Genesis 1, and it is often claimed that there is a second creation account in Genesis 2:4b25. This claim is wrong on two counts. Genesis 2 is an origin story, i.e. a story that presupposes the existence of the world, and which seeks to account for features within it. Second, the complete creation narrative runs from Genesis 1 to Genesis 9, albeit with the insertion of material from another source or sources. Only in Genesis 9 is the world known to humans reached. That of Genesis 1, in which animals and humans are vegetarians, General 1:3 am, is the world as God ideally intends it. The actual world is thus a compromise world, and the vegetarian world reappears in prophetic visions of a recreated cosmos, Isa 11:19, 65:17-25. The story of the flood, General 6:5-8-19, describes the destruction of the created world of Genesis 1, as the forces which restrain the destructive waters above and below the heavens are released, General 7:11. This destruction of the created world by means of releasing the powerful waters points to the heart of the Hebrew Bible's idea of creation, that of order. In Job 38:4-41, Yhwh's unanswerable questions to Job stress the theme of order. The sea has powerful limits, Job 38:8-11, dawn happens at God's command, 38:12-15, light has a definite source, while there are storehouses where snow and hail are kept, 38:22. The stars and the clouds operate only at God's behest, 38:31-8. Creation does not only involve the order of the natural world, however. It includes the human moral order, and disorder in this area can affect the order in creation. This is most clearly seen in Genesis 4:1-16, where Cain's murder of his brother Abel affects the earth. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength, General 4:12, but the reason for the destructive flood is also human wickedness. The link between the moral order and the created order is also implied in covenant passages in which the fertility of the land is linked with Israel's obedience to Yhwh's commandments, e.g. Jude 28. The foregoing can be loosely described as the view of prophetic Yawism. Official Yaoism, as found in the Book of Proverbs, was probably more oriented to the view that the universe was a moral universe in which there were built-in mechanisms that brought advantage to those who practiced virtue and thrift, or disadvantages to the lazy and devious. There is also to be found here the belief that wisdom was present at the creation and that she assisted Yhwh, prove 8:22-31. In Sirach, Ecclesiasticus, the wisdom present at creation begins to be identified with the Mosaic Law, Sirach 24. In the apocalyptic literature, especially the Dead Sea Scrolls, the world which God has created is also not what he ideally intends. It is a battleground between angels of light and darkness. Yet this situation is under God's control and will be resolved in God's favor. It profoundly affects the present lives of humans, however, especially those of members of the community, Worms 1997, 74. Consciousness of sin and evil. Because the Bible included the moral order in the overall order which is creation, and saw a connection between moral and natural disorder, it has much to say about sin and evil. This is all, however, at the pragmatic level. There is no theorizing about the origin of evil, and certainly no doctrine of original sin as developed in Christian theology. The stories of human disobedience and inhumanity in Genesis 3-6 are descriptive, as are the important narratives in Exodus and Numbers, which describe the constant rebellions of the Israelites who have been delivered from slavery in Egypt. Passages such as Jeremiah 31:31-4 and Ezekiel 36:24-27, which envisage a new covenant written on human hearts, and led by a new spirit, are to humanity what the paradox of Genesis 1-9 is to creation, a statement that the human race is both created by Yhwh and prone to rebellion, pride and inhumanity. It is no surprise that the existence of moral evil should encourage the kind of speculation about the origin of human fallenness that is found in the Christian doctrine of original sin. One line of development, based upon Genesis 6:1-4, is the belief that watcher angels fell by being attracted sexually to human women. This led to the existence of angels opposed to God who then corrupted the human race. The fall of the Watchers is mentioned in the Ethiopic Book of Enoch, 69:6, and in the Damascus document associated with Qumran, CD 2, 18, in Vermes 1997, 129. It is also possibly implied in the oft-quoted verse from Wisdom of Solomon 2:24, "Through the devil's envy death entered the world, and those who belong to his company experience it." In 2 Esdras, also known as 4 Ezra, 7:116, sic, written c. 100 CE as a Jewish response to the destruction of the Second Temple, the view is found that Adam's disobedience brought dire consequences for his descendants. Theodicy and Skepticism. If there is speculation in the Bible about the paradox of belief in one supreme creator God and the existence of human disobedience and inhumanity, it is to be found in the areas of theodicy and skepticism. To the question, why do the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper, one answer, given in Psalm 37, is that this state of affairs is only temporary. I have not seen the righteous forsaken or his children begging bread. PS 37:25. A more sophisticated answer is attempted in Psalm 73. It is only when the psalmist goes to the temple that he is assured that God's justice will ultimately prevail, and this assurance is supported by one of the few glimmers of the possibility of an afterlife in ancient Judaism. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will receive me with honor. PS 73:24. Other answers to the question range from outright disregard of Yhwh, PS 14:1, 94:7, or, in popular religion, in turning to other gods who might grant what Yhwh had been unable to achieve. Jer 44:15, 25. The most elaborate discussion is in the Book of Job. Yhwh allows the Satan, who is a member of the heavenly court, to destroy Job's wealth and to bring about the death of his children, but Job will not reproach Yhwh. 3. Later, 4. Friends arrive who attempt to persuade Job that God is just, and that Job must have committed an enormous crime against God to have merited such punishment. Their tactics include appealing to divine revelation, 4:12-21, and to the wisdom of bygone ages, 8:8-10. Job is reminded that he is a mere mortal who cannot fathom God's ways, 11:7-12, and his honesty and integrity are called into question, 22:6-11. For his part, Job maintains that he has done nothing to merit the scale of disaster that has befallen him, and he calls upon God to let him put his case which, he is sure, God would judge fairly, 23:1-7. When Yhwh finally addresses Job out of a whirlwind, he makes no attempt to answer Job's complaints, and on the face of it, his questions to Job about whether Job was present at the creation of the universe seem to support the arguments of the friends that mere human knowledge cannot fathom the ways of God. Yet God vindicates Job and criticizes his friends, 42:7-9. The outcome seems to be that Job has been right to maintain his integrity, and he experiences Yhwh's transcendence in such a way that he can say that his whole understanding of reality has been transformed, 42:1, 5-6. Another exploration of these themes is in Ecclesiastes, probably written towards the end of the 4th century BCE. Koheleth, as the self-styled author is called in Hebrew, is candid not only about the injustices of the world, 4:1-3, but about the apparent purposelessness of much life, which he describes as vanity. The created order exhibits only the recurrent cycles of nature, 1:2-11. Human life is largely constrained by events over which humans have little control, 3:1-8, and life will end in the weakness and infirmity of old age, 12:1-8. The main positive contribution that can be made in this situation is for humans to enjoy what God has given them, 2:24-26. Job and Ecclesiastes, for all their individualism, are close to official Yaoism, with its more international concerns. The name Yhwh is never used in Ecclesiastes, and in Job comes only in the prologue, chs. 1-2, and in chapter 38 when Yhwh addresses Job from the whirlwind. The text may have had several authors or editors, and the prologue and epilogue may be later compositions. This does not affect the teaching of the book taken as a whole, however. All the dialogues in Job use divine names other than Yhwh. Also absent from Job and Ecclesiastes are references to Israel's election. Nonetheless, the two books presuppose God's absolute sovereignty in the universe. Their honest questionings add an important dimension to the spectrum of ancient Israel's religion, and one that is absent from the prophetic and apocalyptic traditions, with their certainty that Yhwh or God is fully in control of all that happens in the life of nations. Conceptions of afterlife and eschatology. How people cope with actual deaths and how they theorize about death are two different things, and this section will be concerned with the latter. Given the distinction that is being made, however, between popular, prophetic and official Yaoism, it should be noted that the Hebrew Bible prohibits, and therefore provides evidence for, elements of a cult of the dead in ancient Israel. These implied customs include making cuts in the flesh on account of the dead, perhaps to provide blood for the spirit of the deceased, compared to Lev 19:28, defiling oneself for the sake of a dead person, Lev 21:11, and offering the tithe or part of it to the dead, Jude 26:14. On the other hand, Jeremiah 16:6-7, apparently without any condemnation, describes various mourning rites, including some of those that are prohibited in the texts just quoted. The belief of official, and presumably prophetic, Yaoism was that the dead went to Sheol, a cosmic underworld that was linked to the graves in which people were placed. In Sheol there was a shadowy existence which, according to some texts, excluded any form of contact with God, Psalm 88:10-12. On the other hand, the writers of Job 3:17-19, and Ecclesiastes, Eccles 3:18-20, could gain a certain comfort from Sheol. For Job, Sheol was a place where prisoners would no longer hear the voice of the taskmaster and where the slave would be free from his master. For Ecclesiastes, Sheol ended the opportunity that the powerful had to oppress the weak, and it indicated that, in respect of their final destinies, humans had no advantages over beasts. It is noteworthy that neither Job nor Ecclesiastes had recourse to the afterlife in trying to explain the success of the wicked in the world, unless there is a glimpse of an afterworld in Job's exclamation that God himself will act as his Goel, his kinsperson who upholds his cause, compared to Job 19:25-27. Texts that push the standard view just outlined to its limits and beyond are found in Psalm 139:8, where the psalmist states that even if he tries to flee from God by going to Sheol he will find God there, and incidents such as the taking of Enoch and Elijah up to heaven, General 5:24, 2 Kings 2:11-12. Both stories use the Hebrew verb to take in the sense of being taken to God, and the occurrence of this verb in a similar sense in Psalms 49:15 and 73:24, translated as receive in both cases, has been seen as evidence for a strand of belief according to which fellowship with God established in this life cannot be broken by death. The impulse towards belief in an afterlife, possibly helped by contact with Zoroastrianism, seems to have come from the crisis of 1687-164 BCE, when Antiochus IV proscribed Judaism and some Jews were martyred for their faith. Daniel 12:2-3 seems to envisage a limited resurrection of Jews, leading to everlasting life for some and shame and everlasting contempt for others. Another late passage, Isaiah 26:17-19, ends with the exclamation "Thy dead shall live, their bodies shall rise." The Isaiah passage probably influenced the Thanksgiving hymn from Qumran, Iqh 11 in Verms 1997, 259-60, which has been thought to attest a similar belief in resurrection at Qumran. More recently, a fragment called the Resurrection Fragment, for Q521 in Verms 1997, 391-2, has been published, which contains the line "For he will heal the wounded, and revive the dead and bring good news to the poor." In the Judaism influenced by Greek thought, the idea of the immortality of the soul is found, and it also helps to explain the problem of the suffering of the innocent and the prosperity of the wicked. The Wisdom of Solomon describes life as seen by the ungodly, Wisd. 1:16-20. This includes deliberately oppressing the weak and disposing of the righteous man, because he is inconvenient to us and opposes our actions, Wisd. 2:12. The ungodly are mistaken, Wisd. 2:21-24, and the souls of the righteous are in the hand of God, Wisd. 3:1, the righteous will condemn the wicked and will stand in confidence at the final judgment, Wisd. 5:1-14, after which they will enjoy eternal life, Wisd. 5:15-23. More complex schemes concerning the fate of humans after death can be found in 2 Esdras 7:75-101, according to which there will be 7 orders or ways of punishment and of reward for the unrighteous and righteous respectively, or Enoch 22 in which Sheol is divided into various sections in which the dead wait for the final judgment and enjoy comfort or punishment depending on how they have lived their earthly lives. An incident in 2 Maccabees 12:39-45 indicates belief in atonement for the dead. Following a particular battle, Judas Maccabeus and his men discover that some of their fallen comrades are wearing sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, that is, protective pagan amulets derived from popular religion. The death of these warriors may have been due to this disobedience to the law, compared to 2 Mac 12:34-42, but given that they had died fighting for God's cause, Judas organizes a collection of money to be sent to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering for them. As the writer comments, if you were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. 2 Mac 44. Ancient Israel's eschatological beliefs were bound up with the gap between the world as it was and the world as it should be ideally, if it were the work of Yhwh. In Prophetic Yawism, an important theme is that of the day of Yhwh, a day on which the whole world would witness the awesome splendor of Yhwh's judgment, a day on which all that was proud and lofty would be brought low. Isa 2:12-21, Zeph 1:2-18, Amos 5:18-20. Other prophetic visions concern what will happen in the last days. According to one vision, Isa 2:22-24, Mic 4:104, Jerusalem will become the place from which God's law will be proclaimed for all nations. The nations will go up to Jerusalem and beat their spears into pruning hooks. Other visions look to a covenant for Israel written on human hearts, Jer 31:31-34, Ezek 36:24-27, or to the creation of a new heaven and a new earth, in which the original vegetarian creation is re-established, Isa 65:17-25, compared to General 130. Yet other visions are conceived in terms of the coming of prophetic or royal figures in the pattern of Moses, Jude 18:15, or David, Ezek 34:20-24, or Elijah, Ezek 4:5-6. The Psalms look forward to the coming of God to judge the earth, a judgment that will be accompanied by rejoicing by the forces of nature, PS 96:11-13. The social and formal expression of Israelite religion. Sanctuaries, temples and the temple. The local sanctuaries were the centers of all Hebrew life. How little of the history would remain if Shechem and Bethel, the two Mizpahs and Ophrah, Gilgal, Ramah and Gibeon, Hebron, Bethlehem, and Beersheba, Kadesh and Mahanaim, Tabor and Carmel, were blotted out of the Old Testament. Smith 1881, 235. Unfortunately, in the Bible as we have it, strenuous attempts were made either to blot these sanctuaries out of the text, or to discredit what went on at them, from the point of view of later orthodoxes. Nowhere is the tension between popular religion and prophetic religion as great as in regard to sanctuaries and temples, with official religion vying with both as occasion demanded. Yet many stories afford glimpses of popular religious practices which, if the recent tendency to date such stories to the post-exilic period is correct, must have persisted well into the Second Temple period. The story of Jacob mentions a sacred stone, Hebrew matzeva. The setting up of such stones is roundly condemned at Deuteronomy 12:3, 16:23, which Jacob set up and anointed as a sign that the place was the house of God, General 28:18. Pillars, using the same Hebrew word, are also mentioned in the story of Moses, Exod 24:4, as having been set up when the Book of the Covenant was ratified. Such visual markers of the presence of the deity are well known from excavations in the ancient Near East. Portable symbols of the divine presence, in the form of household gods, Hebrew Terraphim, are mentioned in the stories of Jacob, General 31:33-35, and David, 1 Sam 19:16, while in the Book of Judges a certain Micah sets up in his house both teraphim and an ephod, possibly an object used for divination, and installs a priest to minister at his shrine, which apparently also includes a graven image, Hebrew pestle. Forbidden in the Ten Commandments at Exodus 24, and a molten image. Although the word ephod is the same Hebrew word as for the garment to be worn by the high priest, Exod 28:4, it is presumably a different object, and in the story of Gideon, Judge 8:27, the ephod which he makes from a vast quantity of gold is, in the view of the text as we have it, a snare which leads Gideon and his people away from God. In the story of Abraham, God appears to him by the oaks, or terebinths, of Mamre, and it is arguable that these trees were a sacred grove associated with the divine presence, compared to Isaiah 1:29, rather than simply indicators of a location. Sanctuaries were often sited upon hills, so that going to the sanctuary involved mounting up the sides of hills or sets of steps, compared to Jacob's dream at General 28:12. In this way the idea of divine transcendence was mediated, and such sanctuaries were called high places. Various cult objects were sited in or close to sanctuaries, apart from obvious cultic furniture such as altars and their accoutrements. The Ark of the Covenant resided successively at the sanctuaries of Bethel, Judge 20:27, Shiloh, 1 Sam 3:3, and finally Jerusalem. There is mention of the lamp of God at Shiloh, 1 Sam 3:3, the bread of the presence at Nob, 1 Sam 21:6, and bull images at Bethel and Dan, 1 Kings 12:28-29. The latter are condemned by the text as we have it, and there are doubtless links between the story of Jeroboam setting up the bull images at Bethel and Dan and the story of the Israelites making and worshipping the golden calf in Exodus 32. However, it has been argued that the bull images served as the throne of the invisible Yhwh and that they earned prophetic and, later, official disapproval because of their possible identification as fertility symbols. Hezekiah is reported to have broken in pieces a bronze serpent to which the people burned incense, and which was said to have been made by Moses, 2 Kings 18:4. The Solomonic Temple contained, in addition to the usual cultic furniture, 2 pillars, not matzavot, called Jachin and Boaz. While these names have not been satisfactorily explained, the function of the pillars was probably to convey a sense of grandeur and transcendence, given their height, some 26 feet 6 inches, and their circumference, some 17 feet 6 inches. Together with a molten sea standing upon 12 oxen, stands with panels portraying lions, oxen and cherubim and standing upon wheels, and 10 lavers of bronze, 1 Kings 7:21-39. The 2 great pillars were part of an architectural assemblage designed to convey the splendor and mystery of the house of God. For much of its history, the first, Jerusalem, temple was a royal sanctuary, serving the needs of the official cult, as opposed to the local sanctuaries which served the needs of popular religion. As such, the Jerusalem temple reflected the ups and downs of Judah's political life. Ahaz is reported to have installed an altar copied from one he saw in Damascus when he paid homage to Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria in around 733 BCE, 2 Kings 16:10-16. Josiah removed from it the vessels made for Baal, Asherah and the host of heaven, as well as horses and chariots dedicated to the sun that stood at the entrance to the temple, 2 Kings 23:4-12. The attempted centralization of worship in Jerusalem by Josiah from 622 BCE had the effect of making the Jerusalem temple into a national sanctuary. This had profound implications for the personnel of the local sanctuaries that were closed down, and it had the effect of making the Passover, CP 254 below, a festival that could only be celebrated in Jerusalem, Jude 16:1-7. No doubt the centralization was a device for securing greater control over affairs in Judah, but it was also an attempt to bind the nation closer to the one God, Yhwh, who could only legitimately be worshipped at the one sanctuary. From now on, the Jerusalem temple played a key role in the theologizing of Judaism. Books such as Joshua, Judges and 1 and 2 Kings were edited from the standpoint that faithfulness to the one sanctuary was identical to exclusive loyalty to Yhwh. Kings and their subjects were judged to be either righteous or evil according to whether or not they were loyal to the one sanctuary. Following the temple's destruction in 587 BCE, it became a site towards which those who were in exile prayed. 1 Kings 8:27-30, Dan 6:10. Hopes for its restoration became a vehicle for eschatology. The closing chapters of Ezekiel envisage a restored temple that will be appropriate to a people who will have received a new heart and a new spirit. Ezek 36:26. The temple will be fitting for a holy and transcendent God, and its appearance will differ from that of the first temple. Ezek 43:6-9. See Allen 1990, 229-35 for a description and plan of the temple as conceived by Ezekiel. By describing a temple different from the second temple, rebuilt and completed c. 515 BCE, the Qumran community indicated their rejection of official Judaism. The Temple Scroll, 11 QT, Verms 1997, 190-219, fills a gap in the biblical record by purporting to be the instructions of God to Moses about the building of the Jerusalem Temple, and the organization of its personnel and festivals, see below, pp 256-7. And 283-6. Its criticism of the current temple are articulated in a unique fashion, not as prophetic revelation in the manner of Ezekiel, but as divine revelation to Moses, actually in direct imperative speech to Moses, as part of the Torah, Micah 59, German ed. 67. Because of the sometimes fragmentary nature of the text, the exact reconstruction of the Qumran temple is disputed. See Micah 1985, 58-70, German ed. 68-76. What is clear, however, is that architectural descriptions became a potent method for sectarian definition. It has been argued that the same consideration played a part in the origins of Christianity, and that part of the program of Jesus and his followers was a rejection of the Jerusalem Temple. Chilton 1992. By the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the beginning of Christianity, Judaism had had to develop forms of worship, especially in the diaspora, i.e. Jews living outside Palestine, that did not require the temple and its services. It is usually supposed that the synagogue was developed during the post-exilic period to meet this need, although the earliest actually surviving synagogue, that at Masada, dates only from the 1st century BCE at the earliest. Literary sources, however, suggest that the synagogue was a well-established phenomenon by this time, although the term synagogue can refer to a group of people or a building, and no doubt covered these and other forms of activity space devoted to prayer, worship, study and education. Religious calendars and festivals. Calendars, like temples, can become institutions that are used to shape and control a nation's religious life. They can also become the means whereby a dissident group expresses its rejection of an official cult. It is generally held that the oldest calendar in the Bible is the so-called ritual Decalogue of Exodus 34:17-26, dating perhaps from the early monarchy, i.e. 10th-9th century BCE. Prominent in this Decalogue is the following calendar: 7 days of unleavened bread are to be observed in the month of Aviv, March, as well as the Feast of Weeks, i.e. the wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering, of the fruit harvest, at the year's end, i.e. autumn. These are 3 harvest festivals: the barley harvest, unleavened bread, the wheat harvest, in May-June, and the fruit harvest, September. It has often been pointed out that Passover is not mentioned in connection with these festivals, although it is referred to in Exodus 34:25 in another context, and that the command to all males to appear on these 3 occasions before Yhwh does not specify that this should be at the single sanctuary. The calendar in the ritual Decalogue is thus assumed to date from a period when males were required to go to a local sanctuary on the occasion of the 3 harvest festivals. In the course of time, Passover was linked with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the whole timetable was elaborately set out in connection with stipulations about temple offerings and Sabbath rests in Numbers 28, see also Lev 23. It is generally held that what had originally simply been agricultural festivals were progressively officially observed as commemorating Israel's deliverance from Egypt. Passover was linked to the barley harvest celebration of unleavened bread, while the wilderness wanderings were associated with the autumnal fruit harvest, which was called the Festival of Booths or Tabernacles. See Lev 23:33, 43. Later Judaism associated the Festival of Weeks with the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, although this connection is not explicitly made in the Bible. Leviticus 23:26 adds in the Day of Atonement. This is the official calendar. However, there are glimpses in the Bible of other, popular, festivals, as well as indications of how the harvest festivals were celebrated in the popular religion. Judges 21:19-21 mentions a yearly feast of Yhwh at Shiloh at which the daughters of Shiloh came out of the vineyards to dance. It can be inferred from the context that this was an autumnal harvest celebration at which future wives were chosen. A connection between barley harvest celebrations and marriage can also be inferred from Ruth 3:1-13, where Ruth indicates her willingness to marry Boaz by lying at his feet on the threshing floor. 1 Samuel 1:3 mentions an annual pilgrimage to Shiloh by Elkanah and his two wives in order to offer sacrifice, while 1 Samuel 20:18 indicates that the new moon was an occasion for an important festival. Jonathan warns David that he will be missed if he does not attend, even though his life is in danger from Saul's attempts to kill him. The excuse offered on David's behalf is that he has been required to attend a yearly sacrifice organized by his family, 1 Sam 20:6, 29. In the story of Elisha, 2 Kings 4:11-24, the prophet promises the Shunammite woman that she will have a boy. When the boy later dies, the woman commands her servant to summon the prophet. The Shunammite's husband is puzzled that the prophet is being summoned, since it is neither new moon nor Sabbath. This latter quotation confirms that the new moon was a time for popular celebration. The reference to the Sabbath is intriguing, since it can hardly be the weekly Sabbath that is being referred to, or if it is clearly envisaged in the story that its observance requires the presence of a holy man. This is a far cry from the Sabbath as a day of no work. The weekly Sabbath rest was the most distinctive feature of the Israelite calendar, and all attempts to trace its origin to another people from whom the Israelites borrowed it have failed. Whether the Sabbath day was derived from the Sabbath year, Exod 23:10-12, or vice versa is not clear, but a strong case can be made for seeing both ordinances as originating in the attempt to create structures of grace, that is, practical arrangements that would prevent the exploitation of slaves, and which would provide food for the poor. The principle of the Sabbath year, that the land was to remain fallow and that the poor and wild animals should eat what grew of itself, was extended to cover the remission of debts in the seventh year, Deut 15:1-6. This is the most likely interpretation of a partly obscure regulation, and the restoration of land to its original owners in the Jubilee year, the 49th or 50th year, i.e. after 7 sabbatical years, in Leviticus 25. Scholars have found hints of other official festivals such as a festival every year or seventh year of the reading of the law, Deut 31:10, and an annual, or periodic, celebration of the bringing of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and God's covenant with the house of David, compare to PS 132, 24, 47. No treatment of the calendar and festivals can be exhaustive in a brief chapter. The publication in 1977 of the Temple Scroll from Qumran has revealed a Jewish calendar from the 1st century BCE that appears to have differed radically from what had come to be the calendar for the Jerusalem Temple of the time. See 11 QT calls 13-29 in Vermes 1997, 192-200. The whole calendar is set out in Maya 1985, 71-6. Whereas the official calendar worked on a lunar year of 354 days with the addition of a 13th lunar month every 3 years or so, the Qumran calendar used a solar year of 364 days, one in which each festival would occur on the same day of the week each year. A similar calendar is known from the books of Enoch and Jubilees. This entailed that major festivals would more often than not be observed at different times at Qumran, compared with Jerusalem. This not only divided the communities but indicated the Qumran belief in the illegitimacy of the Jerusalem cult. The Qumran calendar also interpreted certain biblical texts about how festivals should be celebrated, differently from official Judaism, and added festivals of wine, oil and wood gathering not known from the Bible. See Yardin 1985, 84-111. It has sometimes been argued that Jesus also used an irregular calendar and celebrated the Passover illegally. According to the Temple Scroll, 14 Nisan fell on a Monday-Tuesday, which is at odds with Christian tradition that Jesus celebrated the Passover Last Supper on a Thursday evening. If Jesus was using a different calendar, it does not appear to have been that from Qumran. Priesthood. In the developed religion of the Second Temple period, as found in books such as Leviticus, Numbers and 1 and 2 Chronicles, priesthood is a sophisticated institution which regulates access to God in matters of sacrifice and purity. The latter includes making the priests responsible for diagnosing the skin complaint misleadingly called leprosy in many translations, and for deciding when sufferers from this complaint had been cured, Lev 14. In the developed system, all priests are sons of, i.e. descended from the family of, Aaron, and they are headed by a high priest. There is also the priestly tribe of Levi, to which Moses and Aaron belonged, whose members perform ancillary duties in the temple, working as officers and judges, gatekeepers and musicians. 1 Chron 23:4-5. Scholars are generally agreed that, in the pre-exilic period, Levites, members of the tribe of Levi, were probably priests at the local sanctuaries of Yhwh, and that they were reduced in status as a result of the centralization under Josiah in the late 7th century, and the destruction of the temple and its reordering after the exile. It is also widely believed that the office of high priest is a post-exilic innovation designed to take the place of the monarchy, which did not survive the disruptions of 587 BCE. Certainly, the high priesthood eventually became so important politically that the Seleucid kings, the Greek rulers of Syria from the late 4th century and of Palestine from 200 BCE, were prepared to accept bribes in order to displace holders of an office meant to last for life. Jason ousted his brother Onias III around 170 BCE by bribing Antiochus IV, 2 Mac 4:7-10, only to be outbid and displaced 3 years later by Menelaus, 2 Mac 4:23-29. Later, the Maccabees, the sons and descendants of Mattathias, c. 1 Mac 2, assumed the high priesthood. Jonathan, the second Maccabean leader, 161-143 BCE, became high priest in 153, the post having been vacant since around 160 BCE. Herod the Great, 37-4 BCE, appointed and deposed a whole series of high priests between 35 and 23 BCE. It is widely held that one of the reasons for the founding of the Qumran community was to preserve the true priesthood, following the deposition, and later murder, of Onias III. The community certainly came to be led by priests who claimed to be sons of Zadok, thus claiming legitimate descent and priesthood from the high priest of David's reign, compared to 1 Kings 1:32-40. In these later centuries in which the high priesthood had become a position of power and intrigue, many Jews, especially in the diaspora, had developed their religion in the direction of interpreting the Bible and using it to regulate worship and daily life. Thus, priesthood had become peripheral. Before the exile, the situation was much more pluralistic, if books such as Genesis, Judges and Samuel can be taken to give information about this period. Heads of large families such as Abraham offered sacrifice, General 22:13, and priesthood was not confined to the tribe of Levi. Samuel, who was an Ephraimite, exercised priestly functions, 1 Sam 7:9, while David is also said to have offered sacrifices, 2 Sam 6:18, perhaps inheriting the priestly role of the Jerusalemite kings prior to his capture of the city, but see above, p. 217. From the story of Hannah and Eli, 1 Sam 1, it is evident that priests at local sanctuaries exercised a pastoral role, and scholars have interpreted the Psalms in such a way as to suggest that priests offered comfort to individual worshippers who were in distress, and played a crucial role in national celebrations such as coronations. See also 2 Kings 11, where the priest Jehoiada plays the key role in deposing Queen Athaliah and in installing Jehoash as king. Prophecy. As the division of Israelite religion into official, prophetic and popular religion in this chapter indicates, prophets played a major role in the shaping of Israelite religion. Because their importance has been indicated in other sections where appropriate, this section will confine itself to the institution of prophecy, if there was such a thing. Certainly, the editors of the Bible into its present form thought that there was such a thing as prophecy, but this view conceals the diversity of the phenomenon and the unanswered questions that it raises. In what have traditionally been taken to be early books of the Bible, prophets appear as groups living out alternative lifestyles on the edges of society, under the leadership of figures such as Samuel, Elijah and Elisha, 1 Sam 19:18, 24, 2 Kings 2. They engage in ecstatic behavior and intervene in the political affairs of the nation, 1 Sam 10:1, 16:1, 13, 2 Kings 9:1-13. It is also clear that there were court prophets, whose role was to predict, and therefore hopefully ensure, success for the king, 1 Kings 22:5-12. From the 8th century there appear the misleadingly called writing prophets, Amos, Hosea, Micah and Isaiah of Jerusalem, who are a diverse set of individuals. Isaiah appears to be a court prophet while Micah, from the provincial Judahite town of Morshah, is bitterly critical of Jerusalem and its temple. Amos describes himself as a herdsman and denies that he is a prophet in the professional or conventional sense, Amos 7:14-15. Recent scholarship has suggested that these were not isolated individuals but the heads of groups of disciples. The flowering of prophecy was from the 8th to the 6th centuries, with figures such as Jeremiah, Ezekiel and the authors or originators of Isaiah 40-55 and 56-66 being worthy successors to the 8th century prophets. After the exile, perhaps because of the greater institutionalization of Israelite religion, prophets became rarer, and were even regarded with alarm, as in Zechariah 13:2-3, I will remove from the land the prophets. And if anyone again appears as a prophet, his father and mother who bore him will say to him, You shall not live. For you speak lies in the name of the Lord. By this time, prophecy had become a literary phenomenon, with much attention devoted to the editing of the prophetic books into their extant form. The creative and almost subversive contribution of prophecy was taken over by apocalyptic, CP 2-6, whose role was to provide comfort to a beleaguered and oppressed Israelite people. Resources for the practice of religion. Sacrifice. In the popular and official religion of ancient Israel, sacrifice was an important element. Prophetic religion, on the other hand, was often critical of sacrifice, even to the point of saying that it was offensive to God. Although it is not easy to disentangle the history and uses of sacrifice from the priestly perspective that dominates the treatment of the subject in the Bible in its final form, the most common types of sacrifice in popular religion were probably the whole burnt offering, the communion sacrifice and offering of firstborn animals and of first fruits. The whole burnt offering, in which an animal was entirely burned on the altar, was made at times of great importance such as prior to going to war, 1 Sam 13:8, 12, or to celebrate the return of the Ark of the Covenant from the Philistines. 1 Sam 6:14, 15. Communion sacrifices, the usual translation is peace offerings, compared to 1 Sam 11:15, were probably sacrifices in which the animal was shared by the worshippers and participants as a kind of sacred meal designed to strengthen the bonds between those taking part. Communion sacrifices were offered when Saul was made king, 1 Sam 11:15, and in addition to the burnt offering prior to battle, 1 Sam 13:9, and presumably they were also the sacrifices at family sacrifices, 1 Sam 20:6, 29, and at city sacrifices, 1 Sam 9:12. Offerings of firstborn animals or their equivalent, Exod 34:19, 20, and of first fruits, Exod 34:26, were a means of thanksgiving, and also an expression of hopes for continued material blessing. Popular practices that are condemned include offering the blood of a sacrifice with leaven and boiling a kid in its mother's milk, Exod 34:25, 26. No satisfactory explanation for the rationale or reason for prohibiting the latter practice has yet been advanced. In Israel's priestly religion, sacrifices existed almost entirely to deal with ritual rather than moral offenses. This comes as a surprise to those who approach the Bible from a Christian perspective, in which Christ's death on the cross is believed to enable moral offenses to be forgiven, and is seen as a fulfillment of Old Testament sacrifice. In fact, moral offenses had direct penalties in biblical law. Murder, adultery, blasphemy, apostasy, abuse of parents and certain types of theft were all offenses for which the penalty was death. Damages to persons or property required the guilty party to restore what was damaged with interest. Whether or not the penalties were always carried out, e.g. in the case of adultery, the point was that no sacrifice was prescribed for them. The ritual offenses for which sacrifices operated had the effect of cleansing an offender either from uncleanness, e.g. women from menstrual or birth-giving blood, Leviticus 12:11-18, 15:19-30, men from bodily discharges, including semen, Lev 15:1-18, 32-33, or from contact with death, Lev 11:39-40, 21:11. Sacrifices also enabled boundaries between the sacred and the everyday to be crossed, as when priests were consecrated and took part in an elaborate rite of passage from lay to priestly status, Lev 8. A rite of passage similar to that of priestly consecration was prescribed for a cured leper in order to enable a person to cross the boundary from outside the sphere of ordered social relationships, to which lepers were banished, to within that ordered sphere, Lev 14. The idea of the crossing of boundaries was also at the heart of the Day of Atonement ritual in Leviticus 16, in which a goat over which the high priest had confessed all the iniquities of the people of Israel, and all their transgressions, all their sins, Lev 16:21, was led from the sanctuary, through the people into the wilderness, the sphere of chaos and disorder outside ordered human relationships, to be abandoned there. The reference to Leviticus 16:21 may appear to contradict what was said above about sacrifices dealing mainly with ritual, not moral offenses. But the purpose of the Day of Atonement was to deal with inadvertent, unknown breaches of ritual and cultic prescriptions, as well as guilt in cases where murderers had gone undetected. The concern to deal with guilt in the case of an unsolved murder is indicated in Deuteronomy 21:1-9, in which there is a sacrificial ritual prescribed for any city that is nearest to a man found in open country who has been murdered by an unknown assailant. The purpose of the ritual is to purge the guilt of innocent blood from the midst of the people. Another important element in the sacrifices of ancient Israel was the regular sacrifices offered to God in the temple, each morning and afternoon, Exod 29:38-42, as well as on the occasion of great festivals such as Passover, weeks and booths, Num 28:1-29:39, and CP 254. If these regulations were carried out, and were not simply ideals, the demand upon animals and upon the wood to burn them, one animal would require the wood of one small tree, would have been enormous in a tiny country not best fitted to provide either vast flocks and herds or abundant trees. How far the sacrificial cult as elaborated in parts of Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers was actually carried out, and whether it impinged upon ordinary people, is hard to say. In the late Second Temple period, Jews living close enough to Jerusalem to fulfill at least some of the requirements about males appearing before Yhwh 3 times a year did go up to the temple. For many others, this was impossible on a regular basis. The prophetic denunciation of sacrifice is most strongly expressed in Isaiah 66:3. He who slaughters an ox is like him who kills a man. He who sacrifices a lamb like him who breaks a dog's neck. He who presents a cereal offering like him who offers swine's blood. He who makes a memorial offering of frankincense like him who blesses an idol. Other condemnations of sacrifice occur at Hosea 6:6, I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God, rather than burnt offerings, Amos 5:25, Isaiah 1:12-17 and Jeremiah 7:21-26. Also, Psalms 57-15 is critical of sacrifice, while Psalm 51:16-17 proclaims, For thou hast no delight in sacrifice. Were I to give a burnt offering, thou wouldst not be pleased. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit. A broken and contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise. Sacrifice in ancient Israel served many different needs, was understood in many ways, and provoked varying responses. Hymns, prayers and sacred texts. An important part of the religious life of a people are the liturgies, including the hymns and prayers, which shape their identity and self-understanding. Central to the Bible in its final form are the themes of the delivery from slavery in Egypt and the occupation of the Promised Land and the giving of the law. The first was celebrated annually in the Passover, a festival whose origins are obscure, but which was certainly observed as a national festival from the late 7th century BCE. Its significance is well expressed at Exodus 12:26-27, when your children say to you, "What do you mean by this service?" you shall say, "It is the sacrifice of the Lord." Passover, for he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt, when he slew the Egyptians but spared our houses. At the Passover, the story of the deliverance was rehearsed, accompanied by the eating of the Passover lamb. Deuteronomy 26:5-9 contains another summary of the story of the Exodus and the settlement in the Promised Land, as part of the ceremony of offering the first fruits at the sanctuary. There are also indications that, at the autumnal festival celebrating the fruit harvest, there was a commemoration of the episode of the wilderness wanderings after the Exodus, Lev 23:39-43. The best-known prayer in Judaism is the Shema, beginning with the words here, Hebrew Shema, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, Deut 6:4. As used traditionally in Judaism, this prayer is a combination of three passages, Deuteronomy 6:4-9, 11:13, 21 and Numbers 15:37, 41, and this combination and use probably date from the late Second Temple period. In Deuteronomy 6 the words are a command to the Israelites to show exclusive loyalty to Yhwh by learning, absorbing and teaching the words of the law, which are the basis of a covenant between Yhwh and his people. In other words, the law has become scripture, a sacred text authoritatively declaring God's will. These liturgies, centered around the events of the Exodus and possession of the land and the giving of the law, are the high point of the attempt of prophetically led official religion to shape and control popular religion, and they certainly provided the general framework of Judaism in the Second Temple period. What other resources were available? It has often been suggested that many of the psalms in which an individual expresses his, or her, compared to 1 Sam 1:9-18, distress originated in ready-made compositions that worshippers could use when they went to a sanctuary. This raises the question whether such worshippers could read, and how the texts would be used by illiterate worshippers, i.e. did they learn them, helped by a priest? Although there is no direct proof for this suggestion, it is a reasonable one, and indicates further contact between popular and official religion in times of crisis. In what are probably the later parts of the Bible, the editors have attributed prayers to characters in the narrative, prayers that are indicative of the piety and resources available to worshippers. Some prayers, e.g. those of Jacob, General 28:20-22, and Hannah, 1 Sam 1:11, take the form of vows and promises. Hannah prays, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thy maidservant, and remember me, and not forget thy maidservant, but will give to thy maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. 1 Kings 8:12-53 and Daniel 9:4-19 contain long prayers that deal with the fortunes of the nation, while Jeremiah contains passages which imply a personal religion of intense self-questioning and even doubt, Jer 15:15-18, 17:14-18, 20:7-18. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain a scroll of thanksgiving hymns, Yhwh in Verms 1997, 244-300, as well as songs for the Holocaust, i.e. whole burnt offering, of the Sabbath, for Q 400-407, 11Q17, Marzada 1039-200 in Verms 1997, 322-30. The latter are songs sung by angelic beings on the first 13 Sabbaths of the solar year. The former, although said to be inspired by the biblical Psalms, are highly individual and remarkable compositions, witnessing to the diversity and creativity of the many strands of ancient Judaism. A quotation from him 12 lines 29 to 33, Worms 1997, 265-6, can form the conclusion to this chapter. But what is flesh, to be worthy of this? What is a creature of clay for such marvels to be done? Whereas he is in iniquity from the womb, and in guilty unfaithfulness until his old age. Righteousness, I know, is not of man, nor is perfection of way of the Son of Man. To the Most High God belong all righteous deeds. The way of man is not established, except by the Spirit which God created for him, to make perfect a way for the children of men, that all his creatures may know the might of his power, and the abundance of his mercies, towards all the sons of his grace. Notes 1 General 17:5, God in making a covenant with him says, Your name shall not be Abram but Abraham, for the father of a multitude of nations have I made thee. 2 Eliam presides over a heavenly court, Jude 32:8, ISA 14:13 FF, PS 82:6, Dan 7:18, 22, 25, 27, he dwells on the holy mountain, where the gods assemble, ISA 14:13 FF, PS 46:5, 87:5, he is the creator of heaven and earth and opponent of chaos, General 14:19, 22, PS 18:14 18, he represents the Sun God, who upholds justice, PS 9, 46:5 FF, 50, 57. Bibliography. Allen, L., circa 1990. Ezekiel 20-48. Word Biblical Commentary 29. Dallas, Word Books. Auld, G. and M. Steiner 1966. Jerusalem I, From the Bronze Age to the Maccabees. Cities of the Biblical World. Cambridge, Lutterworth. Beatty, 8 1999. Varieties of Javanese Religion, An Anthropological Account. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. Contains a critique of Geertz, see below. Chilton, B. D. 1992. The Temple of Jesus, His Sacrificial Program Within a Cultural History of Sacrifice. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania State University Press. Day, J. 1989. Molech, a God of Human Sacrifice in the Old Testament. University of Cambridge Oriental Publications 41. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. Geertz, circa 1964. The Religion of Java. New York, The Free Press. A classic anthropological monograph which provides the model adopted in this chapter, but see also B.T. Giddens, A. 1985. A Contemporary Critique of Historical Materialism, 2, The Nation-State and Violence. Cambridge, Polity Press. A Sociological Account of the Difference between Traditional and Modern Nation-States. Handy, L. K. 1992. Lilith. In D. N. Friedman, ed., The Anchor Bible Dictionary 4. New York, Doubleday. Hinels, J. R. 2000. Zoroastrian and Parsi Studies, Selected Works of John R. Hinels. Aldershot, Ashgate. Keel, O. and C. Eulinger 1992. Gottenen, Gotte und Gottessymbole, New Erkenntnis zur Religionsgeschichte Kanans und Israels aufgrund bislang unerschlossener ikonographischer Quellen. Freiberg, Herder Verlag. An account of Israel's popular religion on the basis of iconographic materials. North, A. E. 1988. Midian, Untersuchungen zur Geschichte Palästinas und Nordarabiens am Ende des 2. Jahrtausends wie CHR Abhandlungen des deutschen Palästinierens. Wiesbaden, Otto Harasowitz. An archaeological monograph relating to one of ancient Israel's neighbors. Krauss, H. J. 1966, Worship in Israel, A Cultic History of the Old Testament. Oxford, Blackwell, trans. By G. Buswell of Gottesdienst in Israel. 2nd ed., Munich, Kaiser Verlag, 1962. Lang, born in 1983. Monotheism and the Prophetic Minority. Social World of Biblical Antiquity Series 1. Sheffield, Almond Press. An account of the origins of ancient Judaism in a prophetic Yhwh alone movement of the 9th to 8th centuries BCE. Meyer, J. 1985. The Temple Scroll, An Introduction, Translation and Commentary. JSOTS 34. Sheffield, JSOT Press, trans. R. T. White from Die Tempelrolle vom Toten Meer. Unitaschenbücher 829. Munich, Ernst Reinhard, 1978. Mazar, A. 1990. Archaeology of the Land of the Bible 10,000 to 586 BCE. New York, Doubleday. Newsom, C. A. 1992. Angels. Old Testament. Indy N. Friedman, ed., The Anchor Bible Dictionary I, pp 248-53. New York, Doubleday. Neer, H. 1990. Der höchste Gott, Alttestamentliche Jhwh Glob im Kontext syrisch-kanaanäischer Religion des 1. Jahrtausends v. CHRBZAW 190. Berlin, De Gruyter. A pioneering monograph arguing that ancient Israel's religion developed in the same way as that of Syria with a single god, Yhwh for Israel, Baal Shamim for Syria, gradually and increasingly becoming the high and supreme god. Easterly, W. O. E. and T. H. Robinson 1930. Hebrew Religion, Its Origin and Development. London, SPCK. An example of a now superseded way of using anthropology in reconstructing the religion of ancient Israel. Peterson, D. L. 1981. The Roles of Israel's Prophets. JSOT 17. Sheffield, Sheffield Academic Press. Uses role theory to understand the prophets. Pritchard, J. B., ed., 1955. Ancient Near Eastern Texts Relating to the Old Testament. Princeton, Princeton University Press. ed., 1969. The Ancient Near East, Supplementary Texts and Pictures Relating to the Old Testament. Princeton, Princeton University Press. A standard collection of texts in translation from ancient Egypt, Syria, Palestine, Persia and Mesopotamia relating to ancient Israel. Renz, J. and W. Rolig 1995. Handbuch der alphabräischen Epigraphik I, Darmstadt, Wissenschaftliche Buchgesellschaft. The most recent scholarly edition of ancient Hebrew inscriptions outside the Bible. Rogerson, J. W. 1978. Anthropology and the Old Testament. Oxford, Blackwell. A pioneering monograph about the use of methods drawn from social anthropology. 1998, Beginning Old Testament Study. 2nd Revised ed., London, SPCK. An Elementary Introduction to the Academic Study of the Old Testament. 1999a, An Introduction to the Bible. Harmonsworth, Penguin Books. 1999b, Chronicle of the Old Testament Kings, the reign-by-reign record of the rulers of ancient Israel. London, Thames and Hudson. Rogerson, J. W. and P. R. Davies 1989. The Old Testament World. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. A standard introduction to the history and literature of the Old Testament. Rowley, H. H. 1950. From Joseph to Joshua, Biblical Traditions in the Light of Archaeology. Schweich Lectures 1948. London, London University Press. Smith, W. R. 1881. The Old Testament in the Jewish Church. Edinburgh, A. and C. Black. Perhaps still the best introduction to the so-called Wellhausen hypothesis of the history of ancient Israelite religion and sacrifice that was proposed in the late 19th century and has influenced biblical scholarship ever since. Worms, G. 1997. The Complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English. London, Allen Lane. Yardin, Y. 1985. The Temple Scroll, The Hidden Law of the Dead Sea Sect. London, Weidenfeld and Nicholson.